Chapter 503. Trash. Scum. Get out. In the depths of the West Hill, in the cliffs covered by green vines, hoarse curses full of resentment and violence were heard. The curses were sharp and unpleasant, like sharp swords that could pierce through countless layers of armor. For some reason, they were tightly sealed around the cliffs and did not leak to the outside world. The green vines suddenly became chaotic. A figure flew out from the deep cave and fell heavily on the stone platform. It was a young man in an old Taoist robe. After a long time, he finally woke up and struggled to get up. He held the green vines on the cliff and coughed painfully. Blood spattered from his lips and soon dyed the front of his Taoist robe red. He looked extremely miserable and pitiful. The Taoist was Long Qing. He grabbed the green vines and rested for a while. After confirming that his injury was not serious, he walked to the edge of the cliff, picked up the bucket and the box, and continued to walk to the caves above the cliff. There was no fear or resentment in his calm eyes. He did not even look back at the deep cave. These days, he climbed the cliff covered with green vines every day and dealt with the seriously injured old Taoists in the caves. He deeply felt the violent and horrible temper of these abnormal people. After being humiliated so many times, he naturally became numb. After being injured so many times, he became more and more aware of the huge gap between him and the old Taoist. There was no resentment or revenge. Although the disabled old Taoists in the caves did not have a good face to Long Qing and could order him around, they knew that if they wanted to know the news of the human world in time and keep in touch with the outside world, they could not kill Long Qing directly. Therefore, they still had a sense of propriety. They made Long Qing suffer but did not affect his action. However, there were many caves in the cliff and there were many disabled old Taoists. Everyone thought that they had a sense of propriety, but when they came together, no one knew where their propriety went. Long Qing's injuries in each cave were not serious, but after so many days in so many caves, his injuries were getting worse by the day. Because of his injury, Long Qing moved much slower. It was almost dusk when he finished the day's work and returned to the Taoist temple. The warm and red setting sun shone on the simple Taoist temple from the other end of the West Hill Mountains. He stood in front of the hut by the lake and looked at the beautiful scenery without any expression on his face. The middle-aged Taoist walked slowly to his side and looked at the surface of the lake in the twilight. He did not explain to him the identity of the old Taoists in the caves, but said indifferently, "The more beautiful a place is, the fewer people there are." Long Qing bowed to the middle-aged Taoist and asked, "Uncle Master, are there always so few people in the monastery?" From the South Sea to the Jishou Abbey, Long Qing did not see anyone other than the three martial uncles. The simple and beautiful Taoist temple was shrouded in silence. 10 years ago, when Pippi and the little girl were still here, the monastery was much livelier. But then everyone left, and Yisu only came back occasionally, so the monastery inevitably became a little lonely. The middle-aged Taoist said, "But I heard that the little girl has inherited the position of the great divine priest of judgment, and the great divine priest of light and the great divine priest of revelation will probably be replaced. Then, the monastery will be lively for a few days." The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, the three great divine priests, the nation master of Tang, and people like Master Yen Sei all needed to be baptized by Haotian in the Jishou Abbey before they could be awarded the position of great divine priest. Long Qing knew this story, but he could not help but feel a little lost when he thought that Yi Hongyu had already reached this step. The Holy Land in the hearts of the disciples of Haotian Taoism, the legendary unknown place in the cultivation world, turns out to be such a simple and even boring Taoist temple. Is it a little different from what you imagined? Long Qing shook his head and said, "Since it is unknown, we can't imagine it. We can only know by seeing it with our own eyes. No, even if we live here, we may not know." The middle-aged Taoist looked at him with a smile and said, "It's good that you can understand this. The Jishou Abbey is a place outside the world, so it can be simple, quiet, and even lonely. If you really think that the Jishou Abbey you see is the Jishou Abbey, then you are stupid. The Taoists living in that mountain are the Jishou Abbey. The West Hill Divine Palace is the Jishou Abbey. The Abbey Dean is the Jishou Abbey, you and I are the Jishou Abbey, and the whole Haotian Taoism is the Jishou Abbey. As long as the light of Haotian shines, it is the Jishou Abbey. Before you came to the Jishou Abbey, you were already in the Jishou Abbey. The middle-aged Taoist's words seemed a little profound, but Long Qing at least understood the first sentence. The disabled old Taoist priests living in the cave were unknown in the world, but their cultivation states were extremely terrifying. Some of them had obviously surpassed the 5 states and become the legendary sage in the scriptures. Such a Jishou Abbey was indeed a great place that was hard to imagine. I know very well how bad the temperament of the old guys living in the cave is. Since you are injured, you don't need to bear it. Although it is good for your temperament, it will damage your Taoist body and eventually become an obstacle to your future cultivation. Later, you can go to the pharmacy to make some medicine. The middle-aged Taoist looked at him and said. Long Qing seemed to inadvertently think of something and asked, Uncle, when I was tidying up the medicine warehouse a few days ago, I saw a medicine tripod. I wonder if I can use it. The middle-aged Taoist's eyes revealed an expression of appreciation and said, It seems that you have learned something from cultivating the Sha hand scroll. Your mind is not confused by the complicated cultivation methods, and you can even notice the medicine refining method recorded in the corner. Maybe this is your blessing. If you want to use the medicine tripod, just use it and wash it clean afterwards. The medicine warehouse of the Jishou Abbey was not located by the lake, but on the cliff to the west. It was a 2-story Taoist temple building with complicated talisman characters carved between the pillars and painted with gorgeous patterns. It gave off a sense of nobility and looked more like the main hall of a Taoist temple compared to the huts worshipping the 7 tomes of arcane by the lake. In front of the Hall of Medicine was a large meadow slope. Below the slope was a precipice. The precipice was so deep that even apes and monkeys could not climb it, let alone ordinary people. Even if the world's amazing grand cultivators could climb this precipice, they would be instantly killed by the array hidden in the meadow. Long Qing looked at the meadow that seemed to be burning in the twilight and felt the faintly discernible power of the array. After a moment of silence, he turned and walked to the Hall of Medicine. He held a big old iron ring in his hand, on which there were many seemingly ordinary keys. Without these keys, it was impossible for him to enter the Hall of Medicine. The door of the Hall of Medicine slowly opened, revealing a vast space that did not match the appearance of the hall at all. Several rows of array racks stretched into the depths of the hall. It seemed to be a few miles away, with no end in sight. There were countless rare medicines and raw materials placed on the array racks. Each medicine and material had a corresponding array to provide suitable ventilation and a warm and humid environment. These medicines and materials were rarely seen in the world. Many of them were even marked as missing in the West Hill scriptures. If they were to enter the world, it would probably attract countless cultivators to fight for them. However, there were too many kinds of rare medicines and materials here, but they seemed so ordinary. They were casually placed on the array racks and seemed to have been there for many years, with no one paying attention to them for many years. It was hard to imagine, but it was easy to understand. Whether it was the emperor of the South Jin Kingdom or the monarch of the Kingdom of Song, they had to bow before the West Hill Divine Palace. No matter if they were poor or rich, they had to offer their wealth to the West Hill Divine Palace. This meant that all the wealth and resources in the world belonged to the West Hill Divine Palace. In the words of Master Lotus, the West Hill Divine Palace was a group of dogs raised by the Jishou Abbey. The West Hill Divine Palace plundered all the wealth and resources in the world. Other than maintaining the rule of Haotian Taoism over the world, the most precious things were naturally sent to the Jishou Abbey. From this point of view, what the middle-aged Taoist said earlier was right. The world that was enveloped by the light of Haotian belonged to the Jishou Abbey, except for the country called Tang. Long Qing had been in charge of cleaning up the entire Jishou Abbey these days. He also had to come to the Hall of Medicine every day to pick out the medicines that the terrifying old Taoist in the cave needed. He was already very familiar with this place, so he was not as shocked as he was when he first entered. He carried the key and walked into the depths of the hall, not even glancing at the medicines on both sides. Anyone could develop such a state of mind after living in the mountains of gold and seas of jade. However, when Long Qing walked to the deepest part of the Hall of Medicine and walked to the hollowed-out sandalwood door, his expression became solemn. Behind the hollowed-out sandalwood door was the most important place in the Hall of Medicine, where some of the most precious materials and medicines were stored. He had never entered before because he did not have the key to this door. The medicine tripod that Long Qing needed was right outside the door. He had seen it once through the wooden door a few days ago. Today, he asked tentatively and did not expect to receive permission from the uncle. He found the simplest key on the big iron ring and inserted it into the lock. There was a slight click, and the sandalwood door slowly opened. Long Qing walked in and began to look for the medicinal materials he needed. Most of the materials for the medicine he was going to make were in the main hall. Only 2 of the most important materials should be stored here. Therefore, he was very cautious and even a little nervous. The medicine he was going to make was called the Earth-Sitting Pill in the Sha hand scroll of the Tomes of the Arcane. In addition to curing the injuries left by the old Taoist priests these days, more importantly, it could stabilize his ocean of qi and mountain of snow that had been forcibly repaired by the Abbey Dean. In other words, this kind of pill could make his cultivation go more smoothly. A pill with such an effect was, of course, extremely precious. In the records of the West Hill, it was even described as the supreme elixir that could heal the dead. Long Qing had never imagined that one day he would have the opportunity to make such an elixir. Therefore, his nervousness at this time was understandable. All of a sudden, the nervousness on Long Qing's face was replaced by shock. He did not find the medicinal materials needed to make the earth-sitting pill. But among those bottles and jars, he saw a crystal-clear small porcelain bottle made of unknown materials. There was a very faint smell of medicine coming from the small porcelain bottle. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 504. The Lank Temple was far away in the southeast. It was a long journey, and no one was willing to make time too tight. Therefore, even though the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was held in autumn, most of the tourists and diplomatic corps of the Tang Empire who were preparing to participate in the festival chose to set off in early summer. The Academy was the first to receive the invitation from the Lank Temple and sent Ning Ke as their representative. Sang Sang, who had recovered, followed him as well. Their departure time was today. Other than the eldest brother who had to travel with the headmaster of the academy, the disciples of the back mountain of the academy rarely appeared in the world. These idiots would only feel happy if they stayed in their own world. For them, the back mountain was big enough, and there was no need for them to stir up trouble in the mortal world. Based on this belief, they did not envy their youngest brother who needed to cultivate in the mortal world. Instead, they sympathized with him. Therefore, when Ning Ke set off, just like when he went to the wilderness 2 years ago, all the senior brothers and sisters came to see him off and gave him small gifts to comfort him. Fourth brother and sixth brother often designed and made good things for Ning Ke, so they did not give him anything special this time. It was just an inconspicuous box. Ninth brother Beigong and 10th brother Shiman were still the most careless. They stood by the lake and played a farewell song as a gift. Listening to the sad sound of the flute and zither, Ning Ke snatched back half of the sealwort from the big black horse's mouth. He looked at his 2 senior brothers who were beaming with joy and said angrily, "Is this a farewell or a funeral? Can you not be so unreliable?" The big black horse was also very angry at this time, but no one cared about it. The big white goose was swimming slowly in the mirror lake, pretending to be deep. The little white wolf was half squatting beside Tang Xiaotang's legs, listening to her and Sang Sang's conversation. It tilted its head slightly, as if it understood something. When the song was over, Beigong Weiyang came forward and took out a thin piece of paper from his bosom. He reluctantly handed it over and said, "Little brother, this is the Bailing Sanku score that the world thought was lost. It's extremely precious. You can't give me another unreliable one. Ning Ke wondered why he wanted a score. Tang Xiaotang, the saintess of the diabolism's doctrine, called him youngest uncle. Would he meet the saintess on his journey? But then he thought that if the score was really precious, it could be sold for a lot of money. He took it without hesitation. A score is not a score. Reliable, reliable. Do you know what reliable means? Relying is a term used in chess, so the word reliable refers to the chess records. The fifth brother walked proudly to the center of the crowd, bringing with him an endless sour smell. It was unknown how many days he had not taken a bath. The seventh sister could not help but frown and nag a few words, but he did not care. The Lank Temple is not a dragon's pool or a tiger's den. It is not worth playing such a sad song. Even if it is sad, it is still a joke. However, that shabby temple is famous for the chess world. The monks in the temple are really good at chess. Eighth brother, who had always been indifferent to worldly affairs, looked at Ning Ke with unprecedented determination and said, Eighth brother and I have been practicing hard in the academy. Those monks were lucky enough to be invited to the Lank Temple. Youngest brother, you must not tarnish the reputation of the academy in chess and embarrass me on this trip. As soon as he finished speaking, eighth brother came over with a thick pile of chess records in his arms. He looked at Ning Ke and earnestly said, Youngest brother, you've seen us play dozens of games. Even if we are stupid, our state should be much higher than those monks. It's just that you're too lazy, so your basic skills are not good. These are the chess records carefully made by two senior brothers. You can practice more on the way. Ning Ke was already stunned. He thought, where is this? At this moment, fifth brother snatched the chess records from eighth brother's arms and scolded him sternly, stupid. What is the use of these chess records for youngest brother? Ning Ke was overjoyed. He nodded and said, yes, yes. However, he did not expect that fifth brother would turn around and give the thick pile of chess records to Sang Sang. Sang Sang's understanding of chess is far better than youngest brother's. Fifth brother looked at Sang Sang and said pleasantly, Sang Sang, the important task of maintaining the academy's #1 chess player in the world will be handed over to you. The academy was in the southern suburbs of Chang'an, so they did not have to worry about the city gate being closed. Therefore, in order to avoid the summer heat, Ning Ke and Sang Sang did not leave until the sun was setting and night was falling. Looking at the black horse carriage gradually disappearing into the clouds on the mountainside, second brother frowned slightly. He felt that the atmosphere today was a little strange, as if there were some hidden things that he could not see clearly. Eldest brother watched the black horse carriage leave. After a moment of silence, he turned and left. The twilight shone on his old cotton-padded jacket, and some dust could be seen faintly. It seemed that his cotton sleeves were trembling slightly. Second brother looked back at eldest brother's back on the mountain road. He was slightly moved and chased after him. Eldest brother walked very slowly, but for some reason, it was difficult for second brother to catch up. When eldest brother walked to the hut, the sun was about to set. The night shrouded the valley, and stars appeared one after another in the dark sky. The headmaster of the academy stood outside the hut, half bent and squinting at a cylindrical iron object. He did not know what was in the iron cylinder. Eldest brother walked behind the headmaster of the academy and asked, Teacher, what are you looking at? I'm looking at the stars. Well, I should say stargazing. It's more elegant. The headmaster of the academy motioned him to come over and said, This is made by 6th brother and 13th brother as a gift to me. They named it Stargazing Mirror. I tried it before, and the stars are still the same, but it can magnify the scenery in the distance. I think it's better to use a telescope. Eldest brother put his eyes in front of the iron cylinder and found that, as the teacher said, the stars in the iron cylinder did not become bigger. But if he looked at the mountains in the distance under the starlight, they would be clearly magnified. It's really interesting. Youngest brother really knows a lot of things. He said with a smile, but his smile was a little worried. The headmaster of the academy looked up at the stars in the night sky and said, "There may be people who are born with knowledge in the world, but there are no omniscient people. No matter how much your youngest brother knows, there are always many things he doesn't understand. It's the same for me." It said that the 7 volumes of arcane tomes were formed by Hao Tian's will. When I was still a green-robed scholar like you, I could understand the other 6 volumes. Now I'm old, but I still can't understand the words left by the monk on the Ming hand scroll. Eldest brother said sincerely, "I can't understand it either." Nonsense. If I can't understand it, how can you understand it? The headmaster of the academy looked at him and said with a smile, "But since you can't understand it, don't worry about it day and night." Eldest brother said, "I have to worry about it." The headmaster of the academy looked at him and said sternly, "If this is a story, no one knows how it will develop. You don't know, I don't know, and the world doesn't know. Then why do you think that the story will end like that?" Everyone in the back of the mountain of the academy knew that no matter how cute Chin Pippi pretended to be, and no matter how Ning Kei interjected, the headmaster's favorite disciple was always eldest brother. The headmaster rarely criticized eldest brother, and he had never reprimanded him so severely. After a long silence, eldest brother said, "If there is no worry about tomorrow, there will be worry about today." The headmaster of the academy said, "One should worry about today, not tomorrow." Eldest brother said, "If the headmaster is not worried about the future of the world, why did he let youngest brother go to the Lang temple?" The headmaster of the academy looked at the forest shrouded in silver light and listened to the faint sound of the waterfall in the distance. He said, "The night your youngest brother killed Xiaoho, I found out that Sangsang's illness was more serious than I thought. If I really used the West Hill divine skills to cure it, I'm afraid that there would be problems in the end. I let him take her to the Lang temple to see if the Buddhism sect could cure her illness." Eldest brother said sadly, "What if the illness can't be cured?" The headmaster of the academy turned to look at him and said, "If the illness can't be cured, your youngest brother will be very sad. So even if there is only a glimmer of hope, we have to work 100 times harder. Moreover, she shouldn't have gotten sick." "What about Haotian Taoism?" Eldest brother said, "Sang Sang is the successor of the divine priest of light of the West Hill Divine Palace. If Haotian Taoism knew that she was seriously ill, they would definitely be worried. They should have their own ways to cure her." The headmaster of the academy looked at his favorite disciple and suddenly laughed mockingly. He said, "Cure and save. If Haotian Taoism knew how to cure and save people, why would I be so distressed now? Sometimes I think that when we cure and save people, we may only cure and save our own illness." Eldest brother was thoughtful. The headmaster of the academy said seriously, "You love everyone in the world, so you can't only love one person. But your youngest brother is different. He doesn't love anyone in the world, but only one person. So after killing Xiaoho, he will be happy for the rest of his life. No one knows how far he can go in the future. But you have to bear the pain of struggling to make a choice. If you can't see through this pain, then your gains will be limited." There was silence. After a long time, a clean and gentle smile appeared on eldest brother's face again. He said, "Teacher, I'm willing to keep worrying like this. Because if I don't worry, I won't be me." The headmaster of the academy looked at him and said with admiration, "I was wrong. Your love for the world is not related to any education or stereotypes. It is purely from your heart. How can this limit your future? As for me, I'm still the wild grass swaying on the wall. I always want to move with the wind, but now I don't know where the wind comes from. I don't know what your youngest brother will encounter, but I believe that if he doesn't walk, then he will encounter nothing. As long as he walks, then he will meet the future. When he meets it, it will be the day when we meet the real future. Then we can think about what to do." The headmaster of the academy said with emotion, "It's a pity that the guy who wanted to quarrel with me for 3 days and 3 nights for a bowl of braised pork is already dead. Otherwise, I would like to ask him what he would do." It was unknown when second brother came to the hut. He had been standing quietly by the side, listening to the conversation between the headmaster and eldest brother. Until now, he finally couldn't help saying, "Teacher, although I don't understand what you and eldest brother are talking about, I think I can guess what youngest uncle will do." The headmaster of the academy's expression changed slightly. He stroked his beard and asked, "What will your youngest uncle do?" Second brother said matter-of-factly, "Fight." The headmaster of the academy found that these disciples were becoming more and more like him. They said everything matter-of-factly, but where was the reason? He asked in confusion, "Fight who?" Second brother was also confused. After a while, he said seriously, "No matter who. I'm also going out. Greetings to everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 505. The headmaster was furious and scolded, "How did I teach such an unreasonable guy like you?" Second brother was stunned. He thought that he had always been the headmaster's disciple and everyone knew that he was the most reasonable person. Why did the headmaster say that he was unreasonable? Although Wenguo was not happy, he reflected on himself first. He bowed deeply and asked, "Master, last time when we talked about revenge in front of the cliff cave, you asked me to tell eldest brother that he must be resolute and decisive. Did I misunderstand?" The headmaster said angrily, "Your eldest brother is gentle and benevolent, so he needs you as a mirror to learn how to be more direct. But you are too direct, so I have always taught you to be more cautious. But now? You don't even understand what's going on, yet you want to fight and kill. You only have the bravery of youngest uncle, but you don't have the courage of youngest uncle. Alright, he indeed doesn't have anything else worth praising, but you and your youngest uncle, other than being braver than me, what else can you do?" Second brother was very particular about filial piety. Facing the headmaster's stern scolding, he should not defend himself. Even if he wanted to respect the reason, he should wait until the headmaster's anger subsided. But when he heard the headmaster mention his most respected youngest uncle, he did not know how to defend himself. "Headmaster, I remember what youngest uncle said to me and senior brother when we were young. If we only have courage left, then courage is all we have." The headmaster was stunned and suddenly laughed. He waved his sleeves and said, "That's reasonable. In fact, I also said this to your youngest brother. If the night really comes, we can just fight back. Why do we need to think so much?" The eldest brother thought of the words youngest uncle left behind when he left the back of the mountain on the black donkey. He did not smile like his teacher and younger brother, but became more and more worried. He said, "Since we are going to resist, why don't we make some preparations before the night comes?" The headmaster stopped smiling and said, "Because we don't know where the wind comes from and where the night comes from. Then everything we do in advance may be wrong. Of course, I hope all our guesses are wrong and the night doesn't come." Eldest brother looked up at the sky and sighed. If the night comes, the light should be the most important. Why does Haotian have no reaction? I really don't understand what the heavens are thinking. The headmaster looked up at the dark sky and said, "Look, it's what I said before. There is no omniscient person in the world. I don't know what the sky is thinking. It has been proving this for countless years, so at least we know that it is unknowable." Billions of people in the world had long forgotten the origin of the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival. The underworld still existed in their legends and childhood stories, but it had long become a real legend or story. No one believed that the underworld really existed, and no one believed in the nonsense of the underworld invasion. In the eyes of the people, the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was an important festival to worship ancestors and feed ghosts. The orchid pots placed along the streets, the young girls dressed in traditional clothes, all kinds of tempting food, and the custom of lanterns made the festival not tainted with the slightest bit of gloomy and ghostly aura. Instead, it was full of beautiful and charming images. The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival at the Lank Temple was naturally a grand event in the cultivation world. The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival itself was also a grand event in the world. Other than cultivators, there were also countless tourists, pilgrims, and official delegations from various countries. They set off from different cities and headed towards the Lank Temple. The Tang Empire also sent a delegation according to the old custom. The level of the delegation was very high. To everyone's surprise, the envoy who represented His Majesty to tour the world was the Jinshi General Xian Zhilang. The Jinshi General was one of the 4 royal generals of the Tang Empire. After Xiao's death, his status became even more important. General Xian Zhilang himself was also a legendary figure. His martial arts cultivation state was extremely ordinary, but he had made many military achievements with his exquisite battlefield command. He had been continuously promoted until today. In the military of the Tang Empire, which revered military force, 3 of the 4 generals were experts at the peak of martial arts. Xian Zhilang's individual force was so weak, but he could stand shoulder to shoulder with the other 3. Just from this point, it could be imagined that he had an amazing ability in intelligence or other aspects. Such a figure was definitely qualified to represent the Tang Empire to tour the world. However, the envoy was usually a civil official. Even if His Majesty wanted to show enough respect to the Buddhism sect, it would be enough to send a noble civil official with a title. Why would he send a general? Therefore, this appointment still caused a great controversy in Chang'an and aroused great doubts in the South Jin Kingdom. Who knew if the general would look at the scenery or the city defense along the way? Who knew if the warlike Tang Empire wanted to start a new war? In the end, people confirmed from some gossip that the reason why His Majesty sent Xian Zhilang was mainly because of the following reasons. After Xiao's death, the position of Marshal of the Northeast Border Military, which he had once held, was still vacant. The Yueluan Kingdom in the west of the Tang Empire was no longer a threat, so Xian Zhilang wanted to be transferred to Tiang City. Everyone knew that Her Highness in the Princess's mansion had been trying to win over the great general of the West in recent years. This news directly caused the Empress to be furious. In order to appease his wife's anger, His Majesty had to temporarily put aside the transfer order. In order to appease his daughter and the important general of the country, he simply sent General Xian to the Lank Temple to relax. His Majesty's actions were close to fooling around. He was completely treating the affairs of the country as a family matter, which made people not know whether to laugh or cry. However, it also made many men who were troubled by family matters feel a lot of sympathy, and it also made those young girls who yearned for love feel even more admiration. Accompanying the envoy to the Lank Temple was the dance troupe of the House of Red Sleeves. 30 years ago, after the former emperor of the Tang Empire forcibly summoned the House of Red Sleeves from the South Jin Kingdom to Chang'an, the daughters of the House of Red Sleeves only went to the Lank Temple to participate in the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival once. Since then, they had never left Chang'an. After more than 20 years, the House of Red Sleeves went out again and attracted a lot of attention. All eyes were on the official envoy of the Tang Empire. No one noticed that about a dozen miles behind the envoy, there was a black horse carriage traveling alone on the official road. The wall of the black horse carriage was engraved with complicated and indescribable lines that looked like heavy brocade. Looking at the cold reflection, it seemed to be made of iron and should be extremely heavy. However, the strange thing was that the black horse that was pulling the carriage was leisurely. The carriage traveled on the official road silently, as if it was as light as a feather. The great general of the Tang Empire, the East and the West. Why are all the Tang Empire's generals in the West? I wonder when there will be a Jin Guanxi. Come to think of it, you don't know who Jin Guanxi is. In the carriage, Ning Ke leaned on the soft couch and said with a satisfied expression. This black horse carriage was a magnificent legacy left to him by his master, Yen Sei. It looked ordinary and cold, even a little stiff, but the carriage was very spacious and the equipment was extremely luxurious and comfortable. The carriage was made of stainless steel and was extremely heavy. In the beginning, when he did not have the ability to activate the talisman lines engraved on the carriage, the big black horse was in great pain. When the wheels ran over the carriage, the earth cracked. The wheels were also made of steel, but they did not have any effect on the shock absorption. It was extremely uncomfortable for him, so he rarely sat in this carriage. Now, as he cultivated, his great spirit became stronger and his state gradually improved. Especially after the guidance of seventh sister, he finally understood that the lines on the carriage wall were not pure talismans, but a kind of compound talisman array. After mastering the talisman array on the carriage wall, the faint aura of heaven and earth lingered around the black horse carriage and produced some kind of buoyancy. The heavy black horse carriage became a feather floating in the water. No matter how hard the wheels were, the people sitting in the carriage would not feel the bumps. The painful journey suddenly became a pleasure. However, although the talisman array on the carriage wall was permanent and could summon the aura of heaven and earth in nature, it also needed the aura of heaven and earth to maintain the talisman array. If Ning Ke did not want to die of exhaustion of his psyche power, he had to put a gem in the array eye of the carriage every once in a while. This kind of gem, which contained a relatively high concentration of the chi of heaven and earth, was extremely precious. It was hard to find even in the jewelry shops in Chang'an. Now, the black horse carriage could travel so easily on the long journey because he had gone to the Imperial Center Administration and the Southern Gate Temple to cheat and rob a box of gems. The black horse carriage was very luxurious, and the amount of gems it consumed made it even more luxurious. If he was not Mr. 13 of the Academy, and if he did not have the resources provided by the entire Tang Empire, it would be impossible for him to do so. Ning Ke understood this. When he represented the Academy to enter the human realm, his senior brother had also told him this. Therefore, although he did not want to care about these things in the imperial court, he had to care. Xian Jilang is a very interesting person, he said. Sang Sang closed her eyes and softly hummed. Her body had basically recovered. The reason why she closed her eyes and hummed so softly was that she felt so comfortable that she did not want to open her eyes, let alone speak. Ning Ke and sixth brother had opened a skylight on the roof of the horse carriage. The blazing summer sun penetrated through the skylight and sprinkled on her body, warming her up all the way. The black horse carriage was made of stainless steel. No matter the color or the material, it was the best to absorb heat. However, perhaps because of the cold aura in Sang Sang's body, the horse carriage still seemed so cool after being exposed to the scorching sun for a long time. It did not feel stuffy at all. Ning Ke did not feel hot at all. Sang Sang's cold little feet were always in his arms. It was very comfortable, as if he was holding two little jade fish that had been frozen for a few days. He moved Sang Sang's little feet a little and reached out to pick up a delicate small porcelain pot on the low table beside him. He took a sip of the delightfully fragrant tea and turned to look out of the window. He saw the farmland on both sides of the official road outside the window. Some farmers were painting their homes, some willows were swaying in the wind, and some naked children were playing in the paddy fields. These scenes always made people feel happy and happy. Ning Ke looked at those naked, dark-skinned naughty children and felt that he had seen them somewhere before. Then he realized that as long as he walked in the territory of the Tang Empire, it would be easy to see similar scenes, because happiness was always similar. He looked at Sang Sang's dark little face and smiled, thinking that this long journey was actually not bad even if there was no end. At this moment, the big black horse seemed to feel his thoughts and happily neighed. Homology in progress. I'm also on my journey today. I know it's not fun to read one chapter a day, but if I can keep updating and try not to open the skylight, I'm really working hard. I strongly recommend a novel to everyone to fill our lonely days. The novel is called Grand Master of Dreams. I don't know the author. This is not an advertisement. I'm just a reader who likes reading this book. The word homology comes from this book. This novel has no 3 views, and now it seems to have no bottom line. I like it. It's very good. I seriously recommend it to everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 506. The black horse carriage tailed the convoy of the diplomatic corps. When they were about to reach a county, there were more buildings on both sides of the official road. Ning Ke still liked the scenery of the countryside, so he let the big black horse get off the official road and onto the slightly narrow but still smooth county road. Anyway, he was confident that he would not lose the diplomatic corps in front of him. The countryside scenery on both sides of the county road was even more beautiful, with some primitive and simple flavor. After traveling for a long time, they looked at the village in front of them, and the black horse carriage stopped under a big tree outside the village. The big tree was unknown, but the area of the canopy was huge, with lush green leaves. It was like a big umbrella, blocking the blazing sun and casting a shadow. Ning Ke untied the big black horse and let it play on its own. He walked under the big green tree and touched the thick bark, with a happy smile on his face. His fellow disciples of the academy did not like to leave the mountain, because they cared more about their own spiritual realm. Pure spiritual happiness was enough to make them feel fulfilled, but he was different. He had lived in Min Mountain since he was a child, and the forest was like home to him. Moreover, he had been used to wandering since he was a child, so he did not like to stay in one place for a long time. He had stood in the forest countless times and looked at the distant villages with smoke coming out of the chimneys, and carried Sang Sang away silently because of fear. It was probably because of this that he was extremely fascinated by the scenery of the villages. That year, before returning to Chang'an, he chose to hold Sang Sang's hand and walk through the fields and villages because of this mentality. At this time, he chose a remote county road and stopped outside the village because of this mentality. Sang Sang got off the horse carriage and looked at him shyly. She said, "I fell asleep earlier." Ning Ke said, "It's so comfortable. I want to have a good sleep too." Obviously, Sang Sang had not adapted to the change of her role. She was used to thinking that she was still a little handmaiden. It was really inappropriate for her to just fall asleep like that. In order to make up for this mistake, she tried to remember the last sentence she heard before falling asleep and asked, "How is it interesting?" Ning Ke was stunned for a moment before he realized that she was answering his question from 2 hours ago. He could not help but want to laugh. Looking at her serious expression, he did not want to discourage her, so he answered, "Before leaving Chang'an, Chen 7 came to talk to me. He said that General Xian had been in the Fish Dragon gang for a period of time in his early years and had a good relationship with Cao Xiaoshu. The early years mentioned here were even before Qi 4 and the others. But I don't know why Cao Xiaoshu still lived in Spring Breeze Pavilion after General Xian became a general." "You mean there is something wrong with this person?" Sang Sang asked. Only Ning Ke could understand Sang Sang's words. When she said there was something wrong with a person, she did not mean that this person should be suspected or had something to be vigilant about, but that this person was not good. Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Even if there is something wrong with him, it is the arrangement of His Majesty. Even if he is really determined to get the northeast border military as the rumors in Chang'an City say, it only shows that he has the pride, confidence and ambition that a soldier should have. The emperor is not in a hurry, and the eunuch is not in a hurry, let alone us." Sang Sang said, "I heard that Her Majesty is very unhappy." Ning Ke said, "Don't forget that His Majesty is also my teacher's student, which means that he is my senior brother. He is a really wise person. How could such a person really treat national affairs as a family affair? He is just taking advantage of Her Majesty's anger to warn some people." Sang Sang asked curiously, "Who?" In fact, she was not curious about these things. So she opened her eyes wide and pretended to be curious, which was very deliberate, very childish, and very cute. So Ning Ke kissed her on her little face. Sang Sang was a little shy, but she did not avoid it. She did not avoid it, not because she was flustered and helpless, but because she thought it was natural for her to be kissed by Ning Quebec. "So kiss him if you want." Looking at the little girl's bright eyes, Ning Ke was a little flustered. He coughed twice and continued, "Of course it is to suppress General Xian. No, to be more precise, His Majesty is warning his daughter not to get too deep into the army." "Why? Is His Majesty going to pass the throne to Her Majesty's son?" Sang Sang asked curiously. This time she was really curious, because Li Yu was one of her few friends in Chang'an City, and also because she knew that this matter had something to do with Ning Quebec. Ning Ke said, "I don't know. Anyway, this matter has nothing to do with us." Even if he said it had nothing to do with them, it still had something to do with them. Otherwise, why would he think about these problems? Just like the girls from the House of Red Sleeves in the diplomatic corps dozens of miles away, it was also a problem that he had to consider. Mistress Jian did not ask him to take care of those girls along the way. But with his relationship with the House of Red Sleeves, if something really happened, he could not stand by and do nothing. In addition to their relationship, more importantly, the Academy had the responsibility to take care of the House of Red Sleeves. The girl named Xiao Xiao 30 years ago was the fiancée of youngest uncle and almost became their youngest aunt. She was Mistress Jian's biological sister. More than 20 years ago, the last time the House of Red Sleeves performed abroad was when they were invited to the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival in the Lank Temple. It was also at that festival that their youngest aunt died. Now, after more than 20 years, the House of Red Sleeves would appear in the Lank Temple again. How could Ning Ke not be vigilant? At this moment, Ning Ke suddenly felt that someone was approaching. He could not help but raise his eyebrows and looked toward the direction of the big tree. He saw a black shadow sweeping over like lightning. With his eyesight, of course, he could clearly see that the black shadow was the big black horse. What made him vigilant was what had happened to make the big black horse so flustered. After all, except for the natural disaster more than 10 years ago, the public security of the Tang Empire had always been good. Ning Ke was not worried about his own safety. Even if there were rare bandits, he did not mind killing them and making a name for the Academy. It did not matter even if they were cultivators. First, he defeated Guan Hai, then killed Dao Shi, blinded Lu Yiqing, and finally defeated Xiaohe. Someone's strength had been proven countless times. Although Wang Jinglu was not convinced, there was a consensus in the cultivation world that Ning Ke, Mr. 13 of the Academy, was the real first person below the knowing destiny state. Moreover, with Sang Sang, the successor of the great divine priest of light, by his side, Ning Ke could even fight with a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. Of course, those grand cultivators who had entered the knowing destiny state must be very clear about his and Sang Sang's identity and background. Who would be so free to provoke the Academy and the West Hill Divine Palace at the same time? The big black horse ran back to Ning Ke and Sang Sang, leaving a trail of smoke and dust. It kept panting and looked extremely panicked. Ning Ke looked solemnly at the smoke and dust. As the smoke and dust gradually dissipated, a bare-chested man holding a pitchfork rushed over, yelling and yelling. "Stop running, stupid horse. I'll beat you to death." Things were soon explained. It turned out that the big black horse was walking around and smelling the fragrance of the village in front of him. He could not control his mind and followed the smell to the window. He poked his head into the window and secretly ate the farmer's food. Then he was discovered by the farmer's owner and caused this chase. Ning Ke glared at the big black horse and thought to himself, "You are such a useless fool. Your young master, feed you with yellow spirit fruits every day, and you still want to steal other people's food." Moreover, it was so frightened and panting that it wanted to die after being chased by a farmer with a pitchfork. The big black horse lowered his head in shame and looked extremely honest. He thought silently that it was his fault for not being able to stop himself from eating. If he did not look embarrassed, who knew how he would be punished by Ning Quebec? Ning Ke looked at the farmer and apologized with a bitter smile. The farmer supported himself with the pitchfork and held his waist. He was so tired that he was panting. He said, "This guy runs so damn fast. He is indeed a good horse. No wonder the bowl of porridge I cooked was swallowed in one gulp." Ning Ke felt even more embarrassed when he heard that the big black horse had secretly eaten a bowl of porridge. He said with a bitter smile, "He is used to eating and being lazy. He is not much better." The farmer heard this and shook his head disapprovingly. He said, "When I was in the cavalry camp, I did not see anything better than him. Even the general's mount is not as good as him." The Tang Empire implemented a 3-year recruitment system. In order to open up new territory, the army was not small. In addition, people worshipped martial arts, so many men had experience in the army. Ning Ke was not surprised when he heard this and knew that the farmer had retired from the army. He took out some money and handed it over. He said, "This is the money for the pot of porridge. The pot must be dirty, so it is counted as well." The farmer waved his hand carelessly and said, "I saw this handsome horse through the window and guessed that it had an owner. So I came to have a look. I don't need money for porridge." Ning Ke said with a smile, "If you don't need money for porridge, why did you come to have a look?" The farmer said matter-of-factly, "That's because you have a good attitude. If you are not polite, I will not only need money for porridge, but also the wages for cooking porridge." This kind of matter-of-factness was common in the academy and among the Tangs. Ning Ke liked it very much. He said with a smile, "If so, I will not beat around the bush." The farmer looked at the black horse carriage and Sang Sang, who was wearing a handmaiden uniform. He guessed that they were resting here temporarily. He invited them. "It is not convenient to talk here. Let's go to my house." Ning Ke was good at dealing with people and liked the farmer's temperament. But he was still the indifferent lad in his bones. He wanted to decline when he heard this. Unexpectedly, the farmer insisted and said, "Since we are going to travel a long distance, we should always have clean water. If you care, you can even give me money when you leave." Ning Ke still wanted to decline. The farmer looked at him and frowned. He said, "I can tell that you have been in the military camp. How can you be so wishy-washy?" Ning Ke looked at the farmer's resolute eyes and suddenly thought of the city of Wei that he had not seen for a long time. He thought of the soldiers in the city of Wei and the 3 sentences he left for General Ma before he left. "Then let's go," he said with a smile, "but I still want to drink." The farmer laughed and said, "Homemade grain wine. No matter how good it is, it will be enough. Have a good weekend." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 507. Catch them. Don't let them escape. Don't let them enter the mountain. These bandits are all F***king rats. Kill them all. Leave no captives. A fierce battle took place in the mountainous area at the border of the South Jin Kingdom. In the dusk, one could hear the whistling of arrows, the clashing of swords, and the desperate howls before death. There were less than 500 people on both sides of the battle. However, in the south of the mainland that had been peaceful for a long time, a battle that could leave dozens of corpses was certainly considered fierce. One side of the battle was the regular cavalry of the South Jin Kingdom. They were well trained and had the upper hand in combat. Moreover, they outnumbered the other side, so they quickly won the battle and began to chase after the bandits. The dozens of people who were being chased ran into the deep mountains in panic. From time to time, someone was shot in the back and fell into the bushes, howling in pain. Fortunately, it was late and the mountain path was dangerous. Finally, most of them managed to escape. The dark night shrouded the Sunset Mountain. Occasionally, the strange cries of crows could be heard from the depths of the dense forest. This mountain was part of the vast mountains of the West Hill Divine Kingdom, but it was deep within the territory of the South Jin Kingdom. Beside the bonfire, there were dozens of wounded people lying down. Some were shot by arrows, while others had their arms cut off by axes. The wounded people groaned in pain from time to time. Several men in black and gold armor sat in the warmest place closest to the bonfire. It was obvious that their status in the team was higher than the rest of the people. Their armors were decorated with dense golden patterns. It was obvious that they were extremely expensive and did not look like something a group of mountain bandits would have. Hearing the cries of their companions and the cries of crows in the forest, their faces grew paler and paler. They could not help but look at their silent leader, as if they wanted to get some comfort from him. The leader was a middle-aged man who also wore black armor. However, the golden patterns on his armor were even denser and faintly emitted a faint talisman aura. The middle-aged man was called Zimo. He used to be the cavalry commander of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. The men around the bonfire were like him. They used to be cavalry commanders of the Divine Hall. When Yi Hongyu killed the former great divine priest of judgment and ascended to the seat of heavenly black jade, these powerhouses who had made great contributions to the West Hill Divine Palace were cruelly destroyed of their cultivation and chased out of Peach Mountain. In the past few years, the papal cavalrymen under their command were the most powerful armed force of the judicial department of the Divine Hall. At least in the battle to hunt down the remnants of the Devil's Doctrine and the heretics, the bloody storm that the judicial department stirred up in the world and left a gloomy impression on the world were mostly recorded by them. In other words, the hands of these former commanders were stained with too much blood. They had no country to return to, and no one dared to take them in at the risk of angering the current divine priest of judgment. Yi Hongyu's punishment was very thorough. She stripped them of their power and cultivation. She didn't even let go of the wealth that they had plundered over the years. In the end, she only left them an old horse, 100 taels of silver, and all their retinue. They also had this black gold armor that once represented glory and majesty, but now it could not even bring back memories. It only brought shame and fear. They did not dare to return to the West Hill Divine Kingdom and had nowhere to go. Thus, they could only wander around the countries on the periphery of the West Hill. The taels of silver were soon spent. These commanders suddenly realized that they were like those lowly ants. They had to start thinking about their next meal and where to hide. These former commanders of the Divine Hall had their own skills to make a living. However, they were all extremely prideful people. How could they possibly ask them to do manual labor or something like that? The most troublesome thing was that their years in the West Hill Divine Palace had nurtured their habit of bossing people around. They were high and mighty, and treated mortals like dogs. In the past, these habits and attitudes could be called majesty. Now that they had left the West Hill and become ordinary people, these had become obstacles in their lives. One day, the former commander's team had an incident with a tyrant from the Kingdom of Song. One commander could no longer suppress his anger and ordered his retinue to cut off the tyrant's head. Then, they broke into the tyrant's manor and robbed him of all the gold and silver. They stayed in a luxurious inn in the state capital and enjoyed the wine and women brought by the gold and silver. Suddenly, these former commanders who had been in a daze for several days found a way to survive without bowing and scraping. This method was simple and direct, and they could earn money very quickly. Although their cultivation had been destroyed and they were not even as strong as ordinary men, they were once the cavalry commanders of the West Hill Divine Palace. They had excellent strategies and commanding skills. The retinue that followed them were also very powerful. At least, they could not be compared to the guards in the secular society. So naturally, they began to rob for a living. In a very short period of time, they successively raided several large clans in the countryside. During this process, everyone, including Zmo, remained silent and did not say anything. However, they knew very well that they, who had once sworn to protect light and justice, were falling into a bottomless black abyss. They still felt extremely humiliated and painful in their hearts. Fortunately, they now had a lot of gold and silver, so they could buy a lot of strong wine and women to numb themselves and live one day at a time. Unfortunately, this numbing accelerated the speed of their depravity. They became more and more violent during robberies. Some even started to rape and even kill. Zmo clearly realized that if this continued, there would definitely be problems. He tried his best to restrain them. However, the Divine Hall commanders who had begun to fall were like tigers released from their cages. They fell from the glorious Peach Mountain to the dirty dust. This stimulated them even more, and they could not be restrained at all. One day in midsummer, during a routine robbery at night, one of the commanders or retinue went crazy and beheaded an aristocrat who had already surrendered. The atmosphere of madness suddenly spread, and a tragic massacre took place in the manor. Accompanied by despairing cries, the aristocrat's entire family was killed. Robberies were naturally accompanied by death, and even rape was not rare. However, to kill a South Jin aristocrat's family, especially when the manor was not far from the capital of the South Jin kingdom, they were in big trouble. This massacre did not alarm the powerhouses in the Sword Garret, but it was enough to alarm the imperial court of the South Jin kingdom. During the investigation, the imperial court of the South Jin kingdom was quite cautious when they found out that the murderers were wearing the armor of the cavalry commander of the Divine Hall. They sent letters to the Westhill Divine Palace, confirming that these people were sinners who had been expelled from the Peach Mountain and were no longer entitled to the protection of the Divine Hall. Thus, the imperial court of the South Jin kingdom's caution at the beginning turned into anger. The South Jin kingdom began to distribute arrest warrants, and offered a high reward to the informants. On these arrest warrants, these murderers were given a new name, Fallen Knights. The South Jin kingdom was powerful, second only to the Tang Empire. Now that they were being treated so seriously, these fallen knights, no matter how sharp their eyes were or how good their commanders were all useless. They suddenly fell into a miserable situation and fled in all directions miserably. In the process of fleeing, retinue constantly died or ran away. Even these commanders were killed, and several others were seriously injured. The troop that had left the Westhill with more than 100 people was now left with only a few dozen. Today, they were almost completely annihilated in the encirclement outside the forest. Beside the bonfire, painful howls echoed incessantly. Their expressions were so desperate and gloomy. "Are we waiting for death here?" A strong and burly retinue stood up and walked to the bonfire. Looking at his companions who were mostly injured by arrows because they did not have armor, he said loudly, "Why don't we leave?" Retinue were equivalent to the servants of knights. They were most particular about loyalty. Once they betrayed their master, no one would take them in. However, this person said that he wanted to leave, which proved that the current situation was indeed at its most critical moment. A cavalry commander looked at this retinue with a gloomy expression. He roared angrily, "Guan, I've treated you well. If it weren't for me, how could you be in this situation today? How dare you betray me? Don't forget that your retinue is also on the arrest warrant. Where can you go?" The retinue called Guan looked at his master and sneered, "I've worked hard for you for so many years, but now I've fallen into this situation. How can you say that you've treated me well? As for the arrest warrant, except for your masters who have portraits, who would know such insignificant people like us? We've also robbed a lot of money these days. Let's go our separate ways. Who can find us if we hide?" The commander said angrily, "Don't forget that the money is with me." Guan looked at him disdainfully and said, "I know you won't give the money to you. Knights like you won't let us off even if you die. However, don't forget that your cultivation has already been crippled by the divine priest of judgment. You're now a bunch of useless people. Do you still think it's the same as before?" He looked at the retinue sitting around the bonfire and shouted, "What are you still hesitating for? It's all because of our efforts that we've been able to rob so much money these days. These fellows have long been crippled. They can't even pick up a knife, so how can they be a match for us?" The bonfire was not very strong, and the forest further away was dark. It was impossible to see the expressions on the faces of the retinue, but it was possible to faintly see that they had all raised their heads. The commanders had once been high and mighty. They could bestow favors on their retinue and could also treat them like livestock. Tonight, their own retinue had actually rebelled. It was truly an unbearable humiliation. However, they had to admit that the current situation was extremely dangerous. If they handled things carelessly, they really could end up as corpses in the forest. At this moment, Guanu's voice came to an abrupt halt. An extremely thin metal wire had unknowingly appeared on his neck and then suddenly tightened. The metal wire sank deep into his skin, and blood instantly gushed out. Guanu's eyes widened in horror. His hands desperately dug at his neck, trying to dig out the metal wire. However, his actions were futile. The more he struggled, the deeper the metal wire sank. Layer by layer, it cut through his windpipe, then his esophagus, and all his blood vessels. Please vote for me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 508. Sizzle. Blood kept spurting out from Guanu's neck and fell into the bonfire, giving off a very faint burnt smell. He collapsed on the ground and kicked his legs desperately. His boots kicked up clumps of mud, but he still could not stop the arrival of death, and could not stop his crotch from being wet with urine. Some retinues stood up in shock, but no one dared to move because of years of prestige. Zemo's face appeared in the dark. He used his hand, which was no longer strong but still stable, to take back the metal wire around Guanu's neck and wipe off the remaining blood and flesh. He looked at the retinues with complicated expressions around the bonfire and said expressionlessly, "Even a disabled person is not someone you can disrespect. Never underestimate the means we have learned in the judicial department. So if you don't want to die, you'd better stay calm." The retinues slowly sat back down and lowered their heads. No one knew what they were thinking or if they were really calm. The current crisis was temporarily resolved, but the commanders in front of the bonfire still looked extremely pale and gloomy, just like their mood at this time. Their desperate future was one of the reasons. The most important thing was that they still could not accept the reality. They used to be respected commanders of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. Even the generals of the South Jin Kingdom had to be respectful when they saw them. But now a random state army of the South Jin Kingdom dared to besiege them, and they were besieged so miserably that even their own retinues dared to betray them. "Your Excellency, what should we do?" A divine commander's voice trembled as he asked in despair. Zmo was the most experienced and powerful among these fallen cavalrymen of Divine Hall commanders. He was elected as the leader by the crowd. At this time, they could only hope that he could come up with a solution. Zmo also did not know what to do. Where could these disabled and defeated soldiers go next? In fact, if it weren't for the punishment of the Divine Hall of Judgment, they could still be honored guests of all countries with their wisdom and strategies, as well as their ability to command on the battlefield. However, the Divine Hall of Judgment had cut off this possibility in advance. Every time he thought of this, his hatred and fear for the young divine priest grew stronger. Now the only thing he could rely on was himself. Only by restoring his strength and becoming strong again could he survive in this world. However, how could he become strong again when his cultivation was destroyed? The legendary elixir was just a legend after all. Zmo laughed at himself, then said in a low voice, "Wash up and go to sleep." Hot water was nowhere to be found in the wilderness. While escaping, he could not care about enjoyment and could only sleep. Someone used soil to extinguish the bonfire, and the forest suddenly became pitch black. The thick clouds in the night sky covered all the stars, indicating that there might be a storm tomorrow. Some of them could not bear the exhaustion brought about by the escape and fell into a deep sleep. Some people could not sleep while imagining a hopeless future. Zhe looked at the dark night above his head and thought of the heavy rain tomorrow. His heart became heavier and heavier. He slowly clenched his trembling hands in extreme pain. He desperately and unwillingly thought, "If I can regain my strength and become as strong as before, then I'm willing to give my life and everything to Netherworld King." In the silent night forest, there were still many people praying in despair. The sky was gloomy, but there was no rain, nor was there a rainstorm. However, there were clouds covering the sun, and the midsummer journey became much cooler. Since there was no sun, Sang Sang did not need to bask in the sun through the skylight of the horse carriage. Ning Ke naturally occupied that position. He stepped on the soft couch and stretched his upper body out of the skylight. Facing the wind blowing on the official road, he looked at the surrounding scenery and felt a sense of joy like a rich man. It had been a few days since they left Chang'an, and the black horse carriage had been following the diplomatic mission from afar. Although they had taken several county roads along the way, they were never worried about losing track of them due to the intelligence reports from the government, especially from the secret guards. It was the same even when they left the wilderness and entered the mountains in the south. A vast range of mountains appeared in the middle of the southern wilderness of the Tang Empire, dividing the territory into two regions. Perhaps the mountains had a certain influence on the climate. The same fertile soil in the south and north of the mountains produced very different crops. However, the black horse carriage was traveling in the mountains at this time, so Ning Ke and Sang Sang did not feel any difference. Compared with the familiar Min Mountain, the mountains in the south of the Tang Empire were not so high. However, because the rock was special and easily dissolved in water, there were landslides all year round, which made the peak strange and steep, extremely difficult to climb. Fortunately, there was a valley with dense green plants in the mountains, and the bottom of the valley was a natural passage. Otherwise, if they wanted to connect the north and the south, they might have to detour for more than 1,000 miles. Hundreds of years ago, the Tang Empire used a lot of manpower and material resources to widen the valley, and used talisman masters and tactical array masters to strengthen the two loose and dangerous cliffs of the valley. Then, they planted numerous trees with developed roots that could stabilize the rocks, and finally, the natural road in the valley became a very smooth official road. The black horse carriage traveled on the smooth official road and in the quiet valley. Ning Ke leaned out of the skylight and squinted to enjoy the scenery on both sides of the official road. Looking at the green and calm cliffs, he imagined the great transformation of nature by the Tang people hundreds of years ago. He thought of the talisman masters and tactical array masters with white hair because of the exhaustion of psyche power, and the soldiers and craftsmen who fell off the cliffs. He could not help but feel a little heroic. This heroic feeling had nothing to do with the skylight of the black horse carriage, and had nothing to do with the rich man. The Tang Empire had gone through so much difficulty to open up this mountain range and connect the central and southern territories. It was easy to imagine the strategic importance of this beautiful and verdant valley. Ning Ke could faintly see that there were extremely dangerous and steep mountain paths in the distance of the valley. Beside those mountain paths, there were extremely simple and crude guard stations a few miles away. Looking at the scale of the buildings in the guard stations, there were probably no more than 10 Tang soldiers stationed there. Thinking of the Tang soldiers stationed in the boring guard stations all year round, even someone as indifferent as Ning Ke could not help but feel a sense of admiration. Even the most verdant valley would be a little boring after looking at it for too long. Even the most heroic emotions would calm down after a long time, and even the most vicissitudes of history would become indifferent after experiencing it for a long time. Ning Ke sat back in the horse carriage and drank the herbal tea on the short table. When he calmed down, he picked up the brush and began to write. The purpose of going to the Lank Temple this time was to cure and save people. At the same time, he was also seeking Buddhism, so there should not be any danger. However, Ning Ke still maintained the habits of his youth. He was always ready to face a battle of life and death. Therefore, he was not writing a calligraphy section, but a talisman. The talismans he had written in the past 2 years had all been used on Xia Ho in the battle at the Winter Lake. He had to prepare more now. After some time, Ning Ke raised his head and put down his brush to rest. He rubbed his eyes and looked out of the window. He found that he was still in the valley and could not help but be a little surprised at how long the valley was. When he was writing the talisman, Sang Sang was tidying up the luggage beside him. She touched something and looked at it for a long time before she guessed what it was. She frowned and asked, "How did it become like this?" She held a small iron kettle in her hand. Looking at the deep lines on the outside of the kettle, it should be the same kind of thing as the small iron kettle that had exploded in the lotus field of the snow lake. However, it was much smaller and the shape was also very different. The most obvious difference was that there was an extra bayonet at the bottom of the small iron kettle. This is a whimsical idea of fourth brother. Who would have thought that sixth brother would really do it? Before we left the academy, we tried it once. That day, you and Xiaotang went to the back of the mountain to pick wisteria and cook meat, so you didn't see it. Ning Ke took the small iron kettle that looked a little delicate. It seemed more accurate to call it a small iron tube now, took out a talisman arrow from the iron box and inserted it into the bayonet at the bottom of the small iron tube. With a click, the arrow and the bayonet of the small iron tube were locked tightly. It was so tight that there was not a gap, and it seemed to be unusually stable. Sang Sang reached out to try it and said, "It won't fall." Since he was a little older, Ning Kei's weapons had been handled by her personally. She was very experienced in sharpening knives and repairing bowstrings. If she said it wouldn't fall, then it wouldn't. Ning Kei took out the iron bow and assembled it. He put the talisman arrow in the small iron tube on the bowstring and calmly looked out of the window at the verdant canyon cliff trees that kept moving backward. His breathing gradually calmed down. The primordial 13 arrows were originally extremely terrifying weapons. Now that the people at the back of the mountain of the academy had forcibly added such a thing, it could be imagined that once it was shot, it would definitely cause a great commotion. This was not the back of the mountain of the academy, so Ning Kei could not really shoot it out. Otherwise, if he shot down the cliff that the previous generation of talisman masters and tactical array masters had painstakingly reinforced, even the headmaster of the academy would not spare him, let alone his majesty. After a moment, he put down the iron bow in his hand and said a few words. Sang Sang shook her head and took the iron arrow from his hand. She said, "Although it's not a big problem, the tail of the arrow has to be adjusted." The original talisman arrow could ignore wind resistance and even use the wind as a help. But now the talisman arrow has to be heavier. The most troublesome thing is that the area of the arrowhead facing the wind is too large. If you still want to ensure the accuracy, the shooting distance will definitely be greatly shortened. Ning Kei stuffed the bow and arrow into her arms and reached out to take a water radish. He started to chew it and said in a very irresponsible manner, "It's up to you." The black horse carriage finally drove out of the verdant canyon and came to the southernmost plain of the Tang Empire. The scenery on both sides of the state highway suddenly opened up, but the wind became a little gentler because there was more water. Ning Kei's attention was still on the vast mountains behind him. The moment he came out of the canyon, he suddenly thought that there were countless tactical arrays and talismans set up by the predecessors in the canyon. If a strong enemy were to invade from the south in the future, he only needed a great divine talisman master like Yen Sei to dispel these tactical arrays and talismans to block the canyon. Even if more than 10,000 cavalry came to attack, it would be impossible for them to attack the heart of the Tang Empire at a high speed. Soon he rejected his own idea. There were so many tactical arrays and talismans in the canyon, and it was impossible for one person to destroy them, even if his master was reborn. Unless the Empire had already tampered with these tactical arrays when they opened up the canyon. And even if the cliff collapsed and the road was blocked, the mountains would block the Tang Empire's reinforcements from the south at the same time. In the war, only a simple road was needed. The strong enemy who had the courage and strength to attack the Tang Empire must have enough tactical array masters and talisman masters to forcibly open a road for the cavalry to drive. Then the initiative of the battlefield might fall into the hands of these enemies. Therefore, his war deduction still needed a peerless powerhouse to guard the exit of the verdant canyon. That powerhouse must be strong enough to kill the Buddha, the devil, and the Taoist priest. Moreover, he could not rest, let alone sleep, eat or drink. He might even have to fight with the enemy's powerhouses for 3 days and 3 nights. Thinking of this, Ning Kei could not help laughing. He thought that there was no such a powerful person in the world. Even if there was, how could such a powerful person be so stupid to fall into a situation of certain death? I am looking forward to the future in advance. Green Mountain, Verdant Canyon, see you in the next volume. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 509. Out of the verdant canyon, they came to the real south of the Tang Empire. The fields were crisscrossed, the flowers and trees flourished, and the rivers flowed smoothly towards the south until they finally merged into the famous Great Swamp. Because of the mountains in the north and the verdant canyon, the Tang Empire did not deploy a large number of troops on the southern plains, even though the South Jin Kingdom was powerful and the navy was even more famous. As a result, this similarly rich and populous wilderness was less magnificent than the north, but more elegant and beautiful. The same was true for the houses on both sides of the road. Most of them had white walls and black eaves, high and low, and were faintly discernible between the green trees and water wheels. It did not appear monotonous, but instead had a different kind of quiet beauty. The black horse carriage continued south. The scenery along the way became quieter and quieter. There were more and more rivers and clear ponds and stone bridges. There were fewer farmlands, but more quiet manners. They had arrived at Qinghe County. There was a big city in Qinghe County, known as the first city in the south of the Tang Empire. It was called Yangguan. Although this city was not strategically located, it was located in a very important transportation route. Therefore, although the imperial court did not station a large number of troops here, the defense of Yangguan was under the direct control of the Defender General of the state, Su Shi. Today, the governor of Yangguan was surnamed Zhong. The first surname in the city was also Zhong. They basically controlled all the industries in the city, and the Zhong family was just the most inconspicuous among the big families in Qinghe County. These big families in the south of the Tang Empire owned vast tracts of land and countless wealth. What really made these families last for a long time was the importance they attached to education. These families paid the most attention to education and inheritance. With more than 1,000 years of history, no one knew how many famous people had come out. Not to mention the officials of the Tang Empire, the successive empresses from many years ago, and even several great divine priests of West Hill. Today, many of the children of Qinghe County were serving as priests in the West Hill Divine Palace, or were hired as instructors by the Revelation Institute. The officials at all levels in Qinghe County were basically the descendants of the aristocratic families. However, due to the strict laws of the Tang Empire and the secret suppression of the imperial family for hundreds of years, the families in Qinghe County were relatively low-key. Moreover, they held office in their own hometown and always wanted to fight for face with Chang and city. Therefore, the entire Qinghe County could be said to be politically clean and well-governed. It was very prosperous and lively. Coupled with the unique atmosphere of literati and a slightly comfortable religious atmosphere that could be accepted by the Tangs, it had always been one of the top 3 places to visit in the hearts of the Tangs. There were many shops and tourists in Yangguan City. There were a total of 132 lakes, big and small, so it was also known as the City of 100 Lakes. The most famous one was the Thin Lake in the south of the city. Although the lake was not big, it was close to the government office. More importantly, there were the best brothels and inns in the south by the lake, and the most gorgeous pleasure boats on the lake. The diplomatic corps headed for the Lank Temple rested in Yangguan City for a few days and stayed in a relatively quiet mansion on the east side of the Thin Lake. The mansion belonged to the Song family, one of the 7 families in Qinghe County. When they heard that the diplomatic corps was coming a month ago, the Song family did not hesitate to let them stay. It could be said that they had given the diplomatic corps enough face. There was a post office of the Tang Empire about 4 blocks away from the Thin Lake. A black horse carriage was parked outside the post office. Ning Kei looked at the scenery of the city through the window. He looked at the scholars on the street who bowed to each other and could not help but smile. He thought of his former classmate in the academy, Zhong Dajuan of Yangguan. The Zhong Dajuan that the Zhong family of Yangguan had vigorously cultivated, the Zhong Dajuan that used to be extremely hostile to him, the Zhong Dajuan that he had slapped countless times, the Zhong Dajuan that he had impersonated, the Zhong Dajuan that he had locked up for a long time, the Zhong Dajuan that he had not thought of for a long time. It's all in the past. Ning Kei recalled the days in the academy and could not help but feel that it was a lifetime ago. Now that he and Zhong Dajuan were people of 2 different worlds, he naturally had the right to feel this way. Because of the Zhong Dajuan that he hated, he naturally did not have a good impression of the Zhong family that controlled Yangguan. Incidentally, he also did not have a good impression of Yangguan City. Although he could not find any fault with the city from the horse carriage, he somewhat stubbornly believed that compared to Chang'an, this city was lacking something. As for what exactly it was lacking, he was too lazy to think about it. At this moment, Sang Sang walked out of the horse carriage. Ning Ke asked, "Have you sent the money?" Sang Sang nodded. Ning Ke said, "Are you sure that you used the imperial court documents?" Sang Sang said, "Of course I won't forget to save 5 taels of silver." Ning Ke said with satisfaction, "That's good." Ever since they left the city of Wei, or more precisely, since the old brush pen shop opened and began to earn a lot of money, they would send some money to the city of Wei on time every month. Although the amount was not much, it was still something. According to Ning Ke, it was useless to send money to that shabby place. No matter how much money they sent, it would eventually end up in the gambling house and the wine shop. So there was no need to help those 2 guys. Ning Ke basically spent all his money on buying, renovating and repairing the house by the Yanming Lake. He even spent the next year's gambling house bonus. However, this trip to the Lank Temple should be counted as a business trip, so he did not hesitate to deceive Professor Huang He of the headmaster of the academy's words and swindled 3,000 taels of silver from the front yard. Then he threatened and lured Su Chongshan to get 1,000 taels of silver. His pocket was as full as yesterday. He and Sang Sang were still used to being thrifty. However, since they were rich, they naturally began to care about enjoyment. Although the carriage left by Master Yen Sei was good, it was a little shocking to live in a carriage in Yangguan City. So he chose the most luxurious inn by the thin lake and asked for the best room. He handed the big black horse to the inn's waiter and told him not to feed it dry food like bean buns. The waiter was shocked and speechless. He thought to himself that Ning Ke was indeed a rich man. His horse was so delicate that it could not even eat bean buns. Ning Ke was not afraid that the big black horse would get a stomachache, but he was afraid that it would get angry because the food was not good enough. One had to know that this fool was already used to eating fresh fruits, sealwort, ginseng, and other nourishing things. How could he be interested in those bean buns? As for grass, he wouldn't even look at it. It was originally a foodie. This year, it was led into the ditch by the old yellow bull. It began to pay attention to food like the headmaster of the academy and followed the rule that food was the god. If it really went crazy because of food, even Ning Ke might not be able to control it. After a simple wash in the room, Ning Ke took Sang Sang to the front yard of the inn and asked for a private room on the 2nd floor. They leaned against the railing and looked at the thin lake. As expected, they ordered the most expensive dishes. The food in the south was really unique. Greasy food like smoked duck and meat with soy sauce could also be made light. A green sprout on the side of the plate was elegant. Light food like tofu and green vegetables were dyed with thick soy sauce. Together with a few pots of fruit wine, it was really pleasing to the eyes and the mouth. When Ning Ke and Sang Sang were eating happily, they suddenly heard some noises coming from the lake downstairs. Someone was talking about something that happened today, and the tone was quite angry and dissatisfied. Ning Ke listened quietly for a while and asked the manservant to call the innkeeper. He threw an ingot of silver to the innkeeper and found out what he wanted to know. Old grandfather Chui is celebrating his 100th birthday. It is such a big event. Even His Majesty wrote a congratulatory message and asked the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites to bring it. The West Hill Divine Palace also sent someone, Xian Zhilang, the general of the West. He is a general of the Tang Empire. He did not rest after entering Yangguan, but rushed to the Fuchin River Qing Garden to visit old grandfather. How dare the House of Red Sleeves be so rude? The innkeeper said. It was obvious that he was really unhappy. Ning Ke then knew that the day after tomorrow was the 100th birthday of old grandfather Chui of Qinghe Prefecture. Perhaps the Chui family thought that the House of Red Sleeves seldom came out of Chang'an, so they invited them to sing and dance at the birthday party. But it seemed that something went wrong. The families in Qinghe Prefecture had been around for thousands of years, even longer than the Tang Empire. They had always been respected by the world. Except for the Zhong family, the other families did not live in Yangguan, but in the manors by the Fuqian River. There were many famous gardens on both sides of the Fuqian River, which silently proved the background and power of these families. It was universally acknowledged that the Cui family in Ruyang was the leader of the families in Qinghe Prefecture. The Cui family originated from Ruyang State. 1,000 years ago, when the Tang Empire was founded, the Cui family disregarded the opposition of other families and firmly supported Chang'an. They agreed to let Qinghe Prefecture be incorporated into the Tang Empire. Although it was mostly due to the terrible pressure of Emperor Taizu of the Tang Empire, the Cui family's insistence was proved to be extremely wise. The families in Qinghe Prefecture not only survived, but also won the favor of Emperor Taizu and fought for a lot of benefits. The other so-called families that dared to ignore Emperor Taizu all ended up with a tragic ending. In the subsequent history, the Cui family contributed a total of 5 empresses to the Tang Empire. In other words, His Majesty in the palace of Chang, and must also have the blood of the Cui family. In addition, what was even more awe-inspiring was that the Cui family contributed 2 great divine priests to the West Hill Divine Palace. Today's Cui family was still powerful and unattainable. Old great-grandfather Cui, who was about to live for 100 years, had once been the prime minister. Under the deliberate suppression of the royal family and the civil and military officials, an official from the families in Qinghe Prefecture could actually become the first among the civil officials. This was the first time in nearly 300 years. Just from this alone, one could imagine how important the old great-grandfather Cui was. Many years ago, the old great-grandfather Cui retired from the position of prime minister. Later, his second son was an assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. Now he had resigned and spent his days leisurely in the manor of Fuqian River. The one who remained in the imperial court of Chang, and was the eldest grandson of the 3rd generation of the Cui family. He had also become the junior minister of the Supreme Court. Such a person naturally deserved the emperor's personal congratulation and the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights to come in person for his 100th birthday. Even many officials in the imperial court guessed that if it was not for the implementation of the national policy, perhaps the emperor would have rewarded him more heavily. Now, the House of Red Sleeves might have angered such a super family. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 510. The legendary families of Qinghe County were extremely wealthy and powerful. They had stood for thousands of years in the long river of history. However, they were literate and did not have the face of a nouveau riche or the stench of money. They were truly respectable. If Ning Ke had heard about these powerful families a few years ago, he would have been extremely excited or yearning for the wealth and power of the families in Qinghe County. However, he did not even bother to raise his eyebrows when he heard about these because he really could not get excited. Although he had not entered the realm where wealth was nothing to him, the word wealth was really no different from the floating clouds between the cliffs in the back of the mountain. The back of the mountain of the academy was an unknown place. Although it was said that the 2 worlds were connected and he wanted to represent the academy to enter the human realm, in fact, he was getting further and further away from the secular world. No matter how great a family was, it was still great in the mortal world. How could it be qualified for people outside the mortal world to look down on it? It was just that he did not know when this person outside the mortal world would become a sublime person outside the mortal world. He did not need to care about the families in Qinghe County, but he had to care about the House of Red Sleeves. He looked at the golden thin lake outside the fence and fell into deep thought. The House of Red Sleeves had a strong background and Mistress Jian was on good terms with the Empress. However, it was just a song and dance troupe and also a brothel business. Although the Tang Empire was open and people did not feel that it was lowly, it was not very glorious either. Then why did those girls dare to fight with the families in Qinghe County? More importantly, the House of Red Sleeves had no reason to offend these powerful families in the south. According to the itinerary, even if they danced and danced at Old Master Cui's birthday banquet, they would not have a problem in time. This does not make sense. Ning Kei said, the House of Red Sleeves is just a song and dance troupe. Where did they get the courage? You are right, sir. The shopkeeper sighed and said, although Yangguan is not as good as Cheng and Qinghe County is just a part of the Tang Empire, we are not an ordinary countryside. Old Master Chui's birthday banquet is not a place that anyone can go to. They dared to make excuses when I asked them to dance. The ignorance and disrespect of these girls is really unbearable. Ning Kei smiled and waved his hand to signal the shopkeeper to leave. After a while, the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He looked at Thin Lake outside the fence and said expressionlessly, so they are deliberately making things difficult. The Nikhang song was a dance performed by the House of Red Sleeves during the enthronement ceremony of the new monarch of South Jin Kingdom more than 30 years ago. It was said that when the Nikhang song danced, no audience dared to blink, and no musicians dared to look at the dancers. When the dance reached its climax, it could even be seen that flowers were falling from the sky. No matter how exaggerated the rumor was, Ning Kei did not believe it. He had seen many dances in the House of Red Sleeves, but he had never seen Nikhang. It was not that the girls in the House of Red Sleeves were keeping secrets from him, but that the dance required 36 dancers to dance at the same time, and the building did not have such a large space. Over the years, the House of Red Sleeves had not performed the Nikhang song in other places except for a few times in Chang'an. No one knew that the House of Red Sleeves could no longer perform the Nikhang song. The Nikhang song had high requirements for the leading goddess. Lu Shui, the only one who was able to lead the dance in the past 5 years, had married into a good family. The new girl trained by Mistress Jian was not as good as Lu Shui. She could dance 90% of the charm of the Huchuan dance, but she could not master the Nikhang song. The House of Red Sleeves was still the House of Red Sleeves even though they could not dance the Nikhang song. They were invited to the Lank Temple this time to perform a dance called the Heavenly Maiden Scattering Flowers. It was said to be equally beautiful. However, it was still a terrible thing that their most famous dance might be lost, so it became a secret. The House of Red Sleeves had a close relationship with the Academy, and even more so with Ning Quebec. If he wanted to, he could even know each girl's menstrual cycle. For him, the House of Red Sleeves could not have any secrets. He knew that the House of Red Sleeves could not perform the Nikhang song, so he was sure that the aristocratic families in Qinghe County insisted that the House of Red Sleeves perform the Nikhang song because they knew about it. But why would the aristocratic families in Qinghe County make things so difficult for the House of Red Sleeves? Ning Kei could not figure it out no matter how hard he thought about it. He hurriedly finished his meal and left the inn with Sang Sang. They returned to the post office and looked at the black signboard of the post office. He found the mark he needed and followed the mark on the street of Yangguan to an inconspicuous grocery store. In the grocery store, the shopkeeper bowed slightly and said politely, "What can I do for you, sir?" Ning Kei said directly, "This is the secret guard's place, right?" Hearing this, the shopkeeper's expression suddenly changed. He subconsciously wanted to take out a knife from his waist and stab the young man in front of him to death. But he felt that something was wrong, so he tentatively said, "Gale. Rainstorm? I don't remember." Who has the patience to remember so many of your secret codes? Ning Kei said as he took out an waist token from his belt and threw it to the shopkeeper. Before the battle with Xiaoho, he had returned the waist tokens of the secret guard and the visiting professor of the Imperial Center Administration to His Majesty in the palace. His intention was naturally simple. He just didn't want His Majesty to be in a dilemma. However, to his surprise, His Majesty returned the 2 waist tokens a few days after he killed Xiaoho. And the waist token of the secret guard directly became the head of the secret guard. Of course, this was an honorary title. The shopkeeper took the waist tag and confirmed that it was one of his people. He couldn't help but feel angry. He thought to himself, which colleague trained this newbie? Why is he acting like an idiot? Barging into the shop and asking if it's a secret guard spot? If everyone does this, then what's the point of the secret guard? Luckily I'm careful, wait, this waist token was a little strange. The shopkeeper looked at the obviously different patterns on the waist token and hurriedly flipped through the words on the back. His expression suddenly became strange, and he hurriedly welcomed Ning Kei into the backyard. After entering the backyard, he hurriedly knelt in front of Ning Kei, raised the waist token with both hands, and said in a trembling voice, "Your humble servant pays his respects to the head of the Imperial Center. I have been secretly displeased before, and I hope your excellency can forgive me." There had never been a rule of kneeling in the Tang officialdom, unless it was a very formal ceremony. When ministers entered the palace and met His Majesty, they just casually cupped their hands as a greeting. However, the secret guard was different after all, and the most important thing was that this secret guard was too frightened by the identity represented by the waist token. The current head of the bodyguard was Su Chongshan, a genuine official close to the emperor. Although the shopkeeper was very sure that Ning Kei was not Su Chongshan, he knew that the waist token could not be faked. It meant that Ning Kei was the superior of his superior's superior. Get up. Ning Kei looked at the shopkeeper with a slightly strange expression. He thought that since he was secretly displeased, why did he say it out? Could it be that all the secret guards of His Majesty were gentlemen who would not bully the secret room? Then how could he secretly? He shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He said, "I came to ask about the matter between the Chui family and the House of Red Sleeves." The shopkeeper stood up with a respectful expression. He did not answer, but asked in accordance with the rules, "May I know your excellency's name?" Ning Quebec. Hearing this name, the shopkeeper suddenly had the urge to kneel again. He used a lot of strength to stand up straight and said in a trembling voice, "The fourth steward of the Chui family visited the House of Red Sleeves in the morning and left in anger." It was a very simple answer without any speculation, but it explained a lot of problems. Ning Kei nodded with appreciation and continued, "I don't understand why the Chui family would make things difficult for the House of Red Sleeves. This is not in line with the image created by the families in Qinghe Prefecture, and it is also not in line with their style of doing things. If the House of Red Sleeves is just a singing and dancing troupe without any background, this kind of bullying is meaningless and will only damage their reputation. If they know the background of the House of Red Sleeves, why would they dare to do this? Not to mention the former Prime Minister and the centenarian grandfather, they are all *T in front of His Majesty." The shopkeeper said, "The Chui family must know that the background of the House of Red Sleeves is the Empress. But the Qinghe Prefecture has been helping His Highness these years. In my opinion, are they trying to suppress the power of the Empress?" Ning Kei was slightly stunned and said, "They are indeed not ordinary aristocratic families. They actually dare to interfere in this kind of thing and even dare to choose a side in advance." Then he looked at the shopkeeper and said with a smile, "You are really brave to speak frankly about the matters in the palace." The shopkeeper understood the appreciation in Ning Kei's eyes and finally felt relieved. He said respectfully, "Since Mr. 13 is asking, I naturally dare not hide anything." Ning Kei was slightly surprised and asked, "You know me?" The shopkeeper said seriously, "Who hasn't heard of your name nowadays? You don't have to try to please me. I am just an honorary supervisor, and I don't usually manage things." Ning Kei said, "I just don't understand why the Chui family would dare to do this. Don't they know the relationship between the House of Red Sleeves and me?" The shopkeeper said, "Previously you asked why the aristocratic families in Qinghe Prefecture dared to provoke the Empress by making things difficult for the House of Red Sleeves. I am afraid that a large part of the reason is that they guessed that you are in the city." Ning Kei asked confusedly, "How does it have anything to do with me?" The shopkeeper looked as if he had seen a god. "Sir, General Xiahou died in your hands." Ning Kei said, "So what?" The shopkeeper repeated helplessly, "Because General Xiahou, the Empress' greatest helper, was killed by you. You represent the Academy and support Her Highness, so Qinghe Prefecture naturally wants to express their position." Upon hearing this, Ning Kei thought for a long time. Then he shook his head and said, "The headmaster said that I am writing my own story. I don't like this kind of boring plot, so I have to solve it as soon as possible." The most important question is, when did the families in Qinghe Prefecture start to do such boring things? He asked the shopkeeper to bring a brush, ink, paper and inkstone, and wrote a simple letter. Send this letter to Old Master Cui. I really want to know whether these aristocratic families want to use the Academy's power to help Liu, or to do something else with Liu's power. If they really have other ideas, I can't guarantee what I will think of them. Have a good weekend, everyone. I am going to fly again. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 5:11. Thought was a word that had a wide range of uses. It was often used to describe the feelings between men and women. When Ning Ke left the city of Wei for Chang'an, he traveled with Liu, who was disguised as a maidservant. They had gone through hardships together at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road and told stories by the bonfire. No one could tell if he had any feelings at that time. But even if he had, it had been broken in the morning when Liu slowly left his shoulder and stood up. He had no feelings for Liu, but he still had some feelings for her. In the past few years in Chang'an, the relationship between Ning Ke and Liu had not been broken. Since he knew that Qinghe Prefecture was helping Liu, he had no reason to suppress her. He just wrote a letter to the manor of the Cui family by the Fuchin River and returned to the inn with Sang Sang. They enjoyed the scenery and drank wine, as if they did not know what was happening in Yangguan City. A simple letter was just a test, and it hid some of Ning Ke's impure thoughts. He wanted to know if the families of Qinghe Prefecture made things difficult for the House of Red Sleeves simply to please Liu and the Academy. They wanted to show their loyalty by disrespecting the Empress, or if they had other intentions. Just as he had said to the shopkeeper, it would be fine if it was the former. However, if the families in Qinghe County really had complicated ideas, then when Ning Ke could not understand them, he would inevitably have bad ideas. He represented the Academy and entered the human realm. His ideas were very important to the Tang Empire today. In the Song family's house by the thin lake, autumn was coming, and the greenery was still there. It was a beautiful season, but the atmosphere in the courtyard was a bit depressing. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves were either leaning against the railings or sitting quietly behind the tables. Their beautiful faces were filled with uneasiness and worry. They were not in the mood to enjoy the scenery at all. Not all the girls in the House of Red Sleeves were brothels. But whether it was dancing, singing or something else, they all lived a life of greeting and seeing people off. They were all very knowledgeable. They were very clear that although they were favored by the officials in Chang'an, it was because of Mistress Jian's relationship with the palace. In Qinghe Prefecture, even the officials of the imperial court were born to be 3 levels lower than them, not to mention weak girls like them. They were in big trouble when they met the aristocratic families that did not fear the Empress. They all knew what the problem was, but they could not find a solution. Although the House of Red Sleeves was going to the Lank Temple under the imperial court's order, they were not an official mission after all. They could not expect the aristocratic families to fear them. As the Western General Xian Zhilang was in the Cui's garden, how could they count on him? Thinking of the frosty face of the steward of the Cui family when he left in the morning, the girls became even more frightened. A few of them looked at the little girl sitting at the head of the table and could not help showing a look of resentment. They thought that if she had not been so arrogant and fierce to the steward of the Cui family, she would not have offended the aristocratic families in Qinghe Prefecture to this extent. Although she was usually spoiled by Mistress Jian, this was not Chang'an. How could she be so arrogant? The little girl was Mistress Jian's personal handmaiden, Xiao Chao. This time, she was the leader of the House of Red Sleeves' trip to the Lank Temple. It was obvious that Mistress Jian had begun to train a successor. Compared to 3 years ago, Xiao Chao was slightly older, but still young. However, in this gloomy atmosphere, there was no uneasiness in the little girl's clear eyes. Instead, she looked extraordinarily cold. Looking at the girls, she frowned slightly and said, "Nothing has happened yet." "What are you doing?" In the world of brothels, Mistress Jian's status was equivalent to that of an emperor, and Xiao Chao was her designated successor. Although these girls couldn't help but silently criticize or make faces, no one dared to point out her wrongdoings. A gentle girl looked at the faces of her companions and reluctantly smiled. She stepped forward and softly advised, "Even if Lady Cui is deliberately making things difficult, your attitude this morning is a bit too tough." Xiao Chao sneered and said, "The House of Red Sleeves only performs for His Majesty and the concubine. No matter how much the old master of the Cui family talks, he can't win against these two. For the sake of respecting the elderly, it's okay to go to the Cui garden." However, they deliberately made things difficult. The steward even dared to threaten them. Do they really think that the House of Red Sleeves is an ordinary brothel? Hearing this, the girls looked at each other. They thought that Xiao Chao really had some of Mistress Jian's aura now. However, facing the families of Qinghe Prefecture, the House of Red Sleeves was no different from an ordinary brothel. Now that she showed such an aura, wouldn't it be more humiliating when others bullied her? Xiao Chao knew what they were thinking, but she did not bother to explain. She took out a bag of fragrant melon seeds from her sleeve and started eating them. She knew that even if the great general of the West did not speak, someone else would. Of course, the little girl was not as calm as she looked because she was not sure whether that person was in Yangguan or not. The wind came from the thin lake and slowly blew through the courtyard. It was quiet, and only the sound of eating melon seeds could be heard. Suddenly, a servant came to report that the Cui family had sent someone again. Hearing this news, the girls who could barely sit still stood up in surprise. They thought that how could they come so fast? It seemed that the Cui family was really angry. What should they do? Xiao Chao was slightly stunned and slowly put the melon seeds back into the bag. The fourth steward of the Cui family came to the thin lake again. It should be the third time that he came here in one day and one night. There were few things that could make the fourth steward of the Cui family come to Yangguan City 3 times in a row. Those who could enjoy this kind of treatment must have an extremely powerful background. Then, there would be a lot of trouble. However, the House of Red Sleeves was destined to not encounter any trouble today. Because the fourth steward of the Cui family was carried into the Song Garden on a stretcher. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves looked at the middle-aged man on the stretcher who was dying. Looking at the blood stains that the man's clothes could not hide, they could not help but cover their mouths in shock. They could not associate this man with the calm and gentle master steward of the Cui family last night and this morning. Xiao Chao was also a little surprised. She stood up and looked at the white-haired old man beside the stretcher. The old man bowed to Xiao Chao and said, "I am the head steward of the Cui family. I heard that a servant of the family was disrespectful to you, so I tied him up and brought him here to apologize to you. This servant pointed his finger at you, so the head of the family broke 5 of his fingers and gave him 12 strokes of the cane. Are you satisfied?" At this time, Xiao Chao naturally understood that the person was really in Yangguan City. The nervousness that she tried to hide previously disappeared in an instant. Looking at the fourth steward on the stretcher who was covered in blood, she struggled not to clench her fists but let them hang naturally by the side of her skirt. After getting no dissatisfaction from the House of Red Sleeves, the head steward of the Cui family apologized respectfully again and left the Song Garden with his people. Except for a few drops of blood on the bluestone ground, it was as if nothing had happened. It was as if the horrible shadow cast by that family in the morning last night was just an illusion. It took a long time for the girls to wake up from the shock. When they looked at Xiao Chao again, the way they looked at her was obviously different. The calmness and indifference in Xiao Cao's childish eyes made her look unfathomable in their eyes. Moreover, she had a real imposing manner. Xiao Chao suddenly smiled and then lowered her head to continue eating melon seeds. The girls waved their hands to drive the maidservants away. They personally served the tea and stood aside with a smile. After a long time, Xiao Chao dusted off the crumbs in her hands and took the tea to moisten her throat. She looked at them and said, "In the past, no one dared to provoke us in Chang'an City. Now that we are out of Chang and city, you don't need to panic. As I said, the House of Red Sleeves is not an ordinary dance club. The fourth steward of the Chui family was beaten half to death. He was carried out of the Song Garden and then carried around Yangguan City on a stretcher, which caused many shocked discussions and speculations. The people in Yangguan City could naturally see that this was done deliberately by the Chui family. They were shocked and speechless. They wondered what kind of background the House of Red Sleeves in the Song Garden had to do this to the Chui family. After all, it was not an ordinary noble family, but the Chui family from Qinghe Prefecture who had the confidence to look down on the Empress's family. Then, something even more shocking happened in Yangguan City. A wood-colored carriage came from outside the city. The wheels were still stained with the red river mud of the Fuchin River. The carriage looked shabby and lonely, but everywhere it passed, the bustling Yangguan City suddenly became extremely quiet. Many government runners and stewards stood on the street to maintain order. Many shopkeepers along the street even knelt down in front of the carriage. Everyone in Yangguan City knew that there were only 2 people in Qinghe Prefecture who were qualified to sit in this carriage. One was the clan leader of the Chui family, and the other was the old master of the Chui family. The street in front of the Best Inn in Thin Lake had been closed in advance. There was no one on the street, and it was extremely quiet. The carriage slowly drove to the front of the inn. The innkeeper of the inn had already been waiting by the street. He knelt beside the carriage and respectfully kowtowed a few times. Then, he carefully helped the ordinary rich man out of the carriage. The innkeeper was the innkeeper of the inn, but he was not qualified to enter his own inn today. Following the clan leader of the Chui family into the inn, there was only an ordinary-looking, stooped old steward. The Chui family was the leader of all the families in Qinghe Prefecture. The clan leader of the Chui family was the first person in Qinghe Prefecture. In the hearts of many Tang people, the first person in Qinghe Prefecture was actually the second person in the Tang Empire. Except for His Majesty who lived in Chang and City, no other man could surpass him in status. It seemed that anyone should come out of their room to welcome such a bigwig who came to visit in person. However, Ning Kai did not do so. He did not even show any smile on his face. Because he was sure that the person who could become the first person in Qinghe Prefecture was at least as smart as him. Since they were both smart people, why did they have to do so many hypocritical and meaningless things? The Chui clan's patriarch had an extremely ordinary appearance, and he was even more ordinary than the old manager that followed behind him. He wore silk clothes that couldn't be said to be vulgar, yet absolutely couldn't be said to be elegant, and he looked like an ordinary wealthy man. However, his words were not ordinary. I was wrong. The clan leader of the Chui family sighed with emotion. Back then, I wanted to make His Majesty happy in the imperial court. However, I made His Majesty unhappy, so I was driven back to Qinghe Prefecture. Now that I know that you passed by Yangguan, I probably want to prove that I can flatter you in addition to learning and governing the state. Therefore, I wanted to try to make you happy and restore some of my reputation in this field. However, I did not expect that I would still fail. It seems that I was really wrong. I don't have the talent in this field. Looking up at the sky, I have been writing from noon till now. But I have finally broken through the most difficult hurdle. Tomorrow will be much smoother. The newly bought chair is still very difficult to sit on. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 5:12. Cui Shi used to be the Renhuang of the Central Secretariat and worked in the palace. He was also an assistant minister in the Ministry of Rights and the Ministry of Personnel. A few years after the new emperor ascended the throne, he was impeached for something and returned to the Fuchin River to work as a fisherman. From this simple introduction, this man who looked like an ordinary rich man was just a retired senior official of the imperial court. He was not worth much attention. However, Ning Kai knew very well that when Cui Shi was in the palace, it was when Li Yu was learning to read. In other words, this man was the Princess Chiming teacher. Of course, more importantly, he was the clan leader of the Chui family, so he was a bigwig who must be taken seriously. Although he did not stand up to greet him, he deliberately pretended to be polite. That was why he did not understand what Chui Shi had said. He could not understand why such an important person would want to please him and try to make him happy. Once there was a problem, he would even pay a visit. The history of the Qinghe County was longer than that of the academy. Even if he had to show respect to the academy, there was no reason for him to choose such a crude and direct method. Chui Shi did not solve his doubts. In the following conversation, he calmly and naturally changed the topic, perfectly displaying the temperament and grace of a millennium family. He did not talk about anything related to the House of Red Sleeves, but only recalled the past in Chang'an. Occasionally, he would ask about Princess Li Yu and the little prince. Chui Shi did not probe further and asked Ning Ke to greet the headmaster of the academy on his behalf. He took out a thin letter from his sleeve and put it on the table. He looked at Sang Sang warmly and then left the inn with the old steward who was hunched over. Looking at the quiet street outside the window, Ning Ke said, "He did not need to flatter me, but he did. He did it so casually, without hiding his pride." Sang Sang did not understand. She thought that such a bigwig had already shown enough humility by coming to visit. How could he be proud? In the eyes of the world, the first person in Qinghe County does not need to greet me, a disciple of the academy. But he is a smart man and knows what the academy means to the Tang Empire. Since he knows this, and you are the great divine priest of West Hill, how could it be so easy for him to come? Ning Ke retracted his gaze and looked at the untouched cup of tea in his hand. He said, "There's something strange about this. I feel that Chui Shi just came here to see us. The question is, what does he want to see us for? And I feel that there's a strong confidence in his calmness." Sang Sang said, "Even in the city of Wei, I have heard of the families of Qinghe County. Naturally, such bigwigs speak and act with confidence." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "There is no such thing as true poetry in the world. To be able to be passed down for thousands of years, it is all about power. The aristocratic families of Qinghe County know this better than anyone else. These aristocratic families have had great divine priests of West Hill before, but not in the past decades. I also know that there are 3 grand cultivators of knowing destiny state in Qinghe County, but one of them died in Chang'an. Then these aristocratic families should know that no matter how powerful Qinghe County is, even comparable to Great River, Yueluan, Song and Wei, they have no confidence in front of the imperial court and the academy." Sang Sang suddenly said, "Well, there is something wrong with the old steward." She said there was something wrong this time, but it did not mean that the old steward was a bad person. Ning Ke clearly knew what she was thinking. He could not help but be slightly startled, and then slowly raised his eyebrows. The old steward with a hunched back was too ordinary, so ordinary that he did not even notice what he looked like. But Sang Sang said that there was something wrong with him. Now that Ning Ke had already reached the peak of the see-through state, he could clearly see the threshold of the knowing destiny state. But an old steward that he could not see anything wrong with, could only mean that he was a grand cultivator of the knowing destiny state. "So it is someone else who wants to see me," Ning Ke said in shock. Now there were only 2 grand cultivators of the knowing destiny state left in Qinghe County, and one of them actually came to see him personally. Why was Qinghe County so wary of him, the successor of the academy? If it were not for Sang Sang's unimaginable intuition and sensitivity, he might not even know that he had been carefully observed by a grand cultivator until a long time later. If the old steward had suddenly attacked him, Ning Ke believed that he would be a dead man now. Although he knew that this would not happen, he still had a strong sense of vigilance. He did not understand the confidence of Qinghe County before, and now he could not understand the intention of Qinghe County. However, his vigilance grew deeper and deeper, even to the point of becoming a weak willow by a thin lake, binding his body and making it difficult for him to breathe. So he wrote 2 letters, one to the academy and one to the nation master Li Qingshan, describing what he had seen and heard along the way, his view of the verdant canyon, and the story of what he had met in Qinghe County. The lonely and shabby horse carriage, under the respectful and even fanatical gaze of the people of Yangguan City, drove out of Yangguan City. Even though the old steward sat on the shaft of the carriage, his body was still hunched and his eyes drooped, as if he could not feel the gazes from both sides of the street, as if he had fallen asleep. After an unknown amount of time, the carriage drove into a quiet and secluded manor on the Fuchin River, directly driving to the deepest part of the manor. There was a small building in the garden, and the garden walls that were piled up with rocks were not very high, but there was absolutely no one who would dare to peep here, and there were no stewards or servants here. Cui Shi quickly jumped out of the carriage and walked to the shaft. He respectfully helped the old steward down from the shaft and said, "Thank you, father." It turned out that the old steward, who was still hunched, was the true leader of the Cui family. Elder Cui, who was about to turn 100, was the ancestor of the entire Qinghe County. Elder Cui waved his hand and said, "I'm just going to see someone, what's so hard about it?" Cui Shi helped Elder Cui into the small building. Inside the building, there was a study room with extremely simple decorations. The windows on all four sides were covered with extremely thick cloth, preventing the autumn light from seeping in from the outside, making the room appear particularly dark. Vaguely, one could see 6 seats along the wall, on which sat 6 white-haired old men. Seeing Elder Cui enter, the 6 white-haired old men slowly stood up and bowed. Their movements were slow, not because they wanted to express their dissatisfaction at waiting for a long time, but because they were indeed too old. Elder Cui sat in the round chair directly above, took the towel that Cui Shi had personally heated and placed it on his face. Then, he remained silent, waiting for the hot air from the towel to seep into his tired pores. The 6 old men slowly sat down and waited in silence. There was not a trace of dissatisfaction. After Elder Cui was done, he began to wash his face. He carefully and forcefully scrubbed his old face. As the warm towel rubbed, the wrinkles on his face deepened. Then, he leaned back in the chair, and his old face was completely hidden in the darkness. An old man said, "You've given the academy enough face by going personally." Elder Cui said, "We can afford to offend the Empress, but can we afford to offend the academy?" Furthermore, the core disciples of the headmaster rarely step foot in the mortal world. It's rare for one to enter the human realm, so of course we have to take a good look. It's not convenient for us to go to Chang'an, but since he's here in Qinghe, how can we not see it with our own eyes? An old man asked in confusion, "Why not just send the visiting card and see it directly?" Sending the visiting card doesn't necessarily mean seeing the person. Even if you see the person, you won't see his attitude. What attitude? The academy's attitude. The academy's attitude used to be impartial, but since Ning Ke killed Xiaohe, their attitude will naturally be biased towards Princess Liu. They can't possibly still support the Empress. Elder Cui shook his head and said, "There are many kinds of attitudes. The ownership of the dragon chair is only one of them." An old man asked doubtfully, "The problem now is whether Ning Ke's attitude can represent the academy's." Elder Cui very naturally cupped his hands and bowed towards the northern sky. He said, "Since the headmaster has allowed his young disciple to enter the human realm, then he has expressed his approval. What is Ning Ke's attitude that you've seen?" "He's a very proud and cold young man." Old Master Cui seemed to have thought of something. After saying this, he sank into a long period of silence. When his aged voice rang out once more in the dark study, it felt even more exhausted than before. Moreover, it carried a chill that made one's heart palpitate. Looking at his attitude is more like looking at him as a person. In recent years, many strange changes have happened. Haotian above, I don't believe in the underworld invasion at all, but I firmly believe that there will be a big problem in the present world. To Qinghe County, to us aristocrats, perhaps these strange changes indicate that the biggest opportunity in 1,000 years is about to appear. 1,000 years ago, Qinghe County was incorporated into the Tang Empire. 1,000 years later, what kind of opportunity would Qinghe County have? There was dead silence in the study. Both the 6 old men and Chui Shi, who stood quietly by the chair, were shocked by the hidden meaning in Elder Chui's words. Elder Chui continued, "We are loyal to the imperial court, but we have to think about what we can do if the world is in chaos. Regrettably, in the past 100 years, the Empress of Qinghe County is no longer in the palace of Chang'an, and the great divine priest of Qinghe County is no longer in the West Hill Divine Palace. So there is very little we can do. We can only prepare and wait in silence. So we want to see the West Hill Divine Palace's attitude towards us. I want to see Ning Ke and the Academy's attitude towards us with my own eyes." What is the Academy's attitude towards us? As I said before, Ning Ke is a very proud and a very cold-blooded person. Perhaps cold-bloodedness is just his personality, but pride is a boring temper that runs through the Academy's 1,000 years of history. It has not changed even today. The Academy has the worship of the entire Tang Empire, and does not need to care about us families. So we have no bargaining chips, no right to be proud, and no room to bargain with the Academy. Elder Chui said indifferently. The 3rd Minister of Offerings entered Chang'an and died mysteriously. The Academy does not care, and the Imperial Court did not say anything. It is because Qinghe County is not worthy of their respect. Of course, we still have to make the necessary preparations. Elder Chui looked at an old man in the shadows and said, "Has the West Hill replied?" The old man said, "Morning has arrived." The Tao Addict, the great divine priest of judgment, has expressed her gratitude in the letter. Elder Chui nodded and said, "To be able to help Yi Hongyu secure her position as the great divine priest of judgment is also a form of good karma." The old man suddenly said, "Perhaps we can suppress this Mr. 13 and show our strength. Only then can we gain more respect from the West Hill Divine Palace. There is no point in doing more meaningless things. I don't care what your descendants in the West Hill Divine Palace have asked you in private. I just want to remind you that Ning Ke's little handmaiden will become the great divine priest of light of the West Hill Divine Palace, and his relationship with the great divine priest of judgment is more complicated than we think." Elder Chui leaned forward slightly, revealing his wrinkled face. He looked at the old man and said with an unquestionable attitude, "Most importantly, if the Academy does not change, then no power in this world has the right to change. Everyone can only wait." Everyone in the building understood that the Academy in this sentence was not referring to the Academy, but the headmaster of the Academy. So they kept silent, and then someone finally raised a question in the silence. "When I was very young, I knew that there was a mountain in the Academy. Now that I am in my 80s, that mountain still stands in the south of Chang'an. How long do we have to wait?" Elder Chui cupped his hands and bowed to the north again. He said, "The headmaster has not left this world, so we can only keep waiting. Even if we cannot wait, our sons and grandsons will. No matter how great a person is, he cannot resist the laws of time. There will come a day when he returns to the Haotian divine light." There was silence in the study. Suddenly, someone asked in a trembling voice, "What if the headmaster never dies?" Elder Chui's body stiffened slightly. In the dark shadows, one could faintly see a self-deprecating smile on his old face. Then he sighed softly and said, "If that is the case, then we can only wait forever. We will wait with incomparable respect and meekness. Even if we are dogs, we have to pretend that we have been raised." The topic came to an end at this point. In this world, countless conversations, countless conspiracies, and countless paths would be forced to an abrupt end in the end. Because at the end was a mountain, and that mountain's name was the headmaster of the Academy. The 6 white-haired old men left the small building and returned to their respective manors. They continued to be the masters of their families, or old dogs with a 1,000-year suppressed dream. Elder Chui and Chui Shi did not leave. If such a day really comes, my name will probably be engraved on the pillar of shame in history. Elder Chui said. But your name may also be recorded at the very beginning of the history books. Chui Shi said. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. calm to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 5:13. At the end of the conversation, Cui Shi could not help but ask his father the question that had been lingering in his mind. You said that Ning Ke was a proud and cold-blooded person. I have a different opinion. In recent years, the news from Chang'an, including the princess's residence, says that this person looks clear but is actually extremely shameless. He is very good at flattery, so both the headmaster and His Majesty love him. How can such a person be called proud? Elder Cui smiled and did not speak. Cui Shi laughed bitterly and continued, all right, even if this person learned to be proud in the second floor of the academy, where did his cold-bloodedness come from? I always thought that the information from the military ministry did not count. He could even maintain a good relationship with Yi Hongyu. In my opinion, Ning Ke is really good at politics and is very practical. Elder Cui said, it is impossible to see a person clearly just by looking at his resume and listening to his stories. That is why I insisted on seeing him with my own eyes. Even though it was just a brief glance, it was enough. Cui Shi was slightly stunned. Everyone knew that Ning Ke was going to the Lang Temple, but he did not go with the diplomatic mission. Even though he stayed in the best inn in Yangguan City, he did not have any servants with him. I only saw him and that famous little handmaiden of his. I saw him holding a cup of tea but not drinking it. I saw him talking to you with vigilance even though he seemed to be carefree. However, I didn't see that he loved peace and quiet. Elder Cui said, this is a habit that is engraved in his bones. This can only mean that he is an extremely cautious young man. At the same time, he is also a person who does not know how to write the word trust. I even think that, other than the handmaiden, he might not even completely trust the headmaster. Cui Shi was silent. Old Master Cui looked at the thick black curtains on the window and thought of the young man in the inn. He sighed and said, he doesn't even trust a teacher like the headmaster. Such a person can't just be described as cold. If there are major changes in the future, you must remember to make the West Hill promise that they must first eliminate this young man. Otherwise, we may have to pay an unimaginable price. 2 secret letters from Qinghe County arrived in Chang'an City. A letter was sent to the Southern Gate Temple outside the Imperial City through the secret guard system of the Tang Empire. The recipient of the letter was Li Qingshan, the nation master of the Tang Empire. After a while, He Mingqi walked out of the Southern Gate Temple. He looked at the clear sky and thought that it might rain later. He clamped the yellow oiled paper umbrella under his armpit and boarded the carriage. Under the guidance of the steward, He Mingqi walked into the depths of the princess mansion and came to the balcony that was very famous in Chang'an's social circle. He greeted Li Yu, who was lying on the couch. Li Yu frowned slightly and waved her hand to signal the nanny to take away Buqi, who was writing calligraphy. Then she asked He Mingqi to sit down and asked, there seems to be some problems. He Mingqi did not sit down. This seemingly inconspicuous action meant that Li Yu's perception was not wrong. There was indeed something wrong, and it was not a small problem. He took out the letter from his sleeve and handed it over. Li Yu took the letter and tore open the cover. She was slightly startled when she saw the familiar handwriting on the paper. When she saw the contents of the letter, she could not help but frown even more. The letter was written to the nation master, Li Qingshan. In the letter, he mentioned what he had seen in Qinghe County, especially the test that the Cui family had made through the House of Red Sleeves, and the old steward who had visited him at the inn. The clans of Qinghe County were now the biggest support for Li Yu and her brother in the imperial court. If she wanted to help her brother ascend to the throne, she needed the approval of the academy the most. However, she could not do so without the help of Qinghe County. Li Yu did not know Ning Ke's intentions in writing this letter, but she vaguely understood why the nation master had passed this letter to her. She frowned slightly and said, sometimes I don't really understand the actions of those old people. I can only say that these things have nothing to do with me. He Mingqi nodded and said, I will bring your words back to the Southern Gate Temple. Li Yu raised her head and looked at him quietly. She asked, the nation master did not need to show this letter to me. He could have brought it directly into the palace and given it to my father or Her Majesty. He Mingqi smiled slightly and said, as your disciple, I am not very clear about what you mean. However, since the things in Qinghe County have nothing to do with you, I think you will be very happy. The meaning of this sentence was very obscure, and could even be said to have no meaning at all. However, as a person involved in the situation, Li Yu vaguely caught a certain trend in it. Her eyes slightly brightened. I thank the nation master for his trust. The second letter from Qinghe County was sent to the academy. Professor Huang He looked at the words on the envelope and smiled. He did not open the envelope and let someone take it to the back of the mountain. The person who read the letter was second brother. He was beside the headmaster when he read the letter. Second brother respectfully bowed to the headmaster and said, youngest brother has found some problems. The headmaster's attention was on the small yellow croaker that was being fried on the iron plate. He casually asked, is it serious? Second brother thought for a moment and said, there are only 2 people in the knowing destiny state in Qinghe County. It is not serious. The headmaster said, in that case, why are you still bothering me? Can't you see that I am busy? Second brother was slightly startled and said, how to deal with it? The headmaster said, your youngest brother is cooking fish by the Daming Lake to understand Tao, but he still has not understood the truth of the world. Whether fish is fried or cooked, it is ultimately used for eating. Second brother understood and said, then we will wait for them to jump the beam. The headmaster suddenly thought of something and his expression slightly froze. He forgot to take out the bamboo spatula from the pot, and the edge of the bamboo spatula gradually became scorched. The small yellow croaker also began to emit a burnt smell. After an unknown amount of time, he smiled and said, if the fisherman dies, it doesn't mean that we can't catch fish. If the cook dies, it doesn't mean that we can't fry fish. The beam can't support the broken house forever. When the beam is broken, people will jump from it. Although this jump is not the same as the other jump, clowns will always be clowns. Ning Ke did not know that the great ancestor of Qinghe County had such a deep and serious evaluation of him. After Sang Sang confirmed that there was something wrong with the old steward, he immediately wrote 2 letters back to Cheng and did not think about it anymore. He ranked last in the back of the mountain of the academy. Above him were the headmaster of the academy and other powerful senior brothers and sisters. They would deal with the problem in Qinghe County, so he did not need to worry about it. On that day, he took Sang Sang and left Yangguan City in the black horse carriage. 2 days later, they stopped in front of a ferry. There were no blind thieves who came to rob them, and no stupid officials who wanted to collect taxes. What blocked the way of the horse carriage was a steaming water surface with boundless autumn reeds. The lake in front of the southern wilderness of the Tang Empire sounded very ordinary. It was called the Great Lake. Only those who had been to the Great Lake could feel the majesty of this simple name. The lake was so big that no other word in the world could be qualified to describe it except for the word great. It was just like the Yellow River in the further south. The Great Lake was vast and boundless. Even birds could not cross it in one breath. If there was no ferry, even the most powerful cultivator would not be able to cross it. This was the largest lake in the world, lying between the 2 most powerful countries in the world. It was like Haotian had created a buffer between the Tang Empire and the South Jin Kingdom. It brought peace to the people of the world, but it also brought many inconveniences. There were all kinds of ferries for goods and people to flow between the north and the south. When the water vapor dissipated, countless sails could be seen behind the autumn reeds. The scenery was magnificent and beautiful. But the black horse carriage could only stop by the Great Lake and wait. Because the road leading to the South Jin Kingdom had been cordoned off. Several warships of the Tang Navy were waiting for the arrival of the diplomatic mission. Ning Ke had many ways to ignore the martial law and leave quietly. However, regardless of whether it was for the sake of peace or if he was as cold and cautious as Elder Chui had described him to be, waiting for the diplomatic corps to travel with him would be more appropriate than taking out his waist token to reveal his identity and letting the Tang Navy clear the way for him. Fortunately, the scenery of the Great Lake was pleasant enough, and the diplomatic mission did not make him wait for too long. Just when he was about to get tired of looking at the autumn reeds and eating the raw fish in the lake, the diplomatic mission arrived. On the warship of the Tang Navy, Ning Ke saw the head of the diplomatic mission for the first time. It was the Jinshi General Xian Zhilang, who was known for his weak martial arts but amazing intelligence. The main hall of the warship was empty. Ning Ke and Xian Zhilang sat opposite each other. Because of their status, it was difficult to distinguish who was stronger and who was weaker. The Jinshi General was not simple. This was Ning Ke's first impression of Xian Zhilang. He looked at the man who looked like a woman and had a scholarly temperament and said in his heart, "I work for Her Highness. To be more precise, if His Majesty leaves, I will be loyal to Princely Huiyuan. You don't have to look at me like this. After all, this matter will not be a secret forever." Xian Zhilang looked at him and said with a smile, "When Her Highness tried to let me replace Xiao's position, this secret was no longer a secret. And I believe that now that the Empress in the palace has tried her best to make His Majesty drive me into this diplomatic mission, she should have already investigated my relationship with the previous Empress." It was a very open and honest conversation, but it reminded Ning Ke of the opening remarks of the master of the Chui family in Yangguan City. So he smiled and said directly, "I don't know." Xian Zhilang said, "Before Empress Renshao married into the palace, I was a manservant who led her horse." Ning Ke said, "This relationship is very deep." Xian Zhilang looked into his eyes and said, "And I have a good relationship with Chao Shaoshu." Ning Ke said, "What do you want to say?" Xian Zhilang said, "I want to make a good impression on you." Ning Ke said, "The Academy strictly forbids interfering in court affairs. Moreover, you are already one of the few bigwigs in the military. I don't think it is meaningful for you to make a good impression on me." Xian Zhilang smiled and said, "The Academy strictly forbids interfering in court affairs, but it never includes those who have entered the human realm. If you can't do anything, why did the headmaster ask you to enter the human realm?" And he suddenly leaned forward and lowered his voice. He said mysteriously, "Su sure is old." Ning Ke looked at him and shook his head. He said, "It seems that I have underestimated your ambition, and you have overestimated me. Don't forget that I am now the most unpopular person in the Tang military." Xian Zhilang smiled and said, "I welcome you very much. I have a runny nose on one side and diarrhea on the other. It is said that I have the legendary gastrointestinal flu again. Who knows? In any case, I am sweating like rain and my whole body stinks. But it does not affect my brain. That is good. I cry silently. Am I finally beginning to act sad again? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 5:14. Ning Ke did not answer because he did not know how to. However, Xian Zhilang's mention of Chao Shaoshu and Li Yu made him feel less awkward when he asked the following question. "His Majesty must know that you once held the horse for Empress Renshao. I don't believe the rumors in the court, so I want to know why His Majesty wants you to go to the Lank Temple." Xian Zhilang looked at him and said, "All the countries gathered in Lank, of course, not just for the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival. They also want to discuss the war with the Desolate Man next year." Ning Ke frowned slightly and thought of the continuous battles in the wilderness over the past 2 years. He said confusedly, "The left king's palace was plowed by the Desolate Man and then weakened by the Divine Hall Coalition Army and Ho Xiaho. Now they have no power to take back the grasslands from the Desolate Man. I can't think of any reason for the Tang Empire and the South Jin Kingdom to fight for the left king's palace. Wouldn't it be better to let the Desolate Man live peacefully in the wilderness?" If it did not involve the old story between the West Hill Divine Palace and the Devil's Doctrine, there was no problem with what he said. As the saying goes, it is better for the Taoist to die than for the left king's palace. No matter how miserable the left king's palace was, as long as the desolate man did not continue to move south and affect the Central Plains countries, who would be willing to face such a powerful enemy? For the West Hill Divine Palace, they don't want to see the desolate man tribe have rich grasslands and live there. That would mean the resurrection of the Devil's Doctrine. For the Central Plains countries, we are also afraid of the desolate man's reproduction. Without the control of the weather in the far north, the desolate man will have a large number of children. Their children will continue to have children, so they will need more and more grasslands. They will drive the herdsmen of the left king's palace to the south, and then they may even have a war with the Golden Palace. What will happen in the end? Just like 1,000 years ago, the desolate man will become strong again and fight with the Tang Empire. Xian Zhilang looked at him and said with a smile, since there will be a war sooner or later, why not make them weaker while they are still weak? From an emotional point of view, Ning Ke had no reason to be hostile to the desolate man because his only niece was a desolate man. He had already joined the devil, so it was even less possible for him to be wary of the Devil's Doctrine like the Haotian Taoism. He said, this may be decades or even centuries later. Xian Zhilang said, even if it's thousands of years, it still starts from this moment. Ning Ke had to admit that this sentence was very convincing, but he still did not intend to change his opinion. He had been to the wilderness before and knew that the seemingly barren land was actually quite fertile. It was enough to support many people. Earlier, Xian Zhilang had mentioned the bloody war between the Tang Empire and the desolate man 1,000 years ago. In fact, that war was not because the two sides needed to fight for living space, but because the continent needed to establish a new overlord. Therefore, in his opinion, unless something changed, the desolate man had no reason to continue moving south. As soon as the word change appeared in his mind, he suddenly thought of the dreams he had and the 2 conversations he had with the headmaster. He suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Xian Zhilang noticed his strange behavior. The cabin was quiet, and only the faint sound of the lake water hitting the side of the ship could be heard. Ning Ke suddenly asked, "Do you believe in the underworld invasion?" Xian Zhilang's expression froze slightly, then he laughed at himself and said, "Of course I don't believe it." Ning Ke looked into his eyes and said, "In recent years, Chang'an has become colder than before." Xian Zhilang said, "The winters where I fed the horses when I was young were colder." Ning Ke said, "You know that's not what I mean." Xian Zhilang said, "I have been in the West all these years." Ning Ke said, "Then why did the desolate man move south?" Xian Zhilang was silent. After a long time, he suddenly laughed and said, "Perhaps a legend will always be a legend. Even if it becomes true, it should be something that the legendary places like the second floor of the academy have to worry about. As soldiers of the Empire, we don't need to think too much. If the underworld invasion really comes one day, as long as His Majesty gives the order, the Tang Empire's cavalry will naturally respond." This was the standard answer of a Tang soldier. Ning Ke was not surprised. However, he was one of the few people in the world who had heard the headmaster say that the night came from the north, so he had to think more. Especially when he thought about how the Lank Temple Conference involved the use of troops against the desolate man. In the next few years, the wilderness in the north would be flooded with blood. It was becoming more and more like the dream he had once had. The coldness that lingered in his body and could not be dispelled became stronger and stronger. Xian Zhilang obviously wanted to have a long talk with him, but Ning Ke was in a bad mood. Because of his inexplicable vigilance, he directly refused and walked out of the cabin. Xian Zhilang walked to the window and watched Ning Ke get off the warship and walk along the lake shore to another warship. Xian Zhilang raised his eyebrows and his eyes revealed a complicated emotion. The House of Red Sleeve Song and Dance Troupe traveled with the Tang Empire's official delegation, so it was naturally convenient. Especially after Ning Ke showed his attitude, the girls were treated even better. They were arranged to have their own worship. Where there were girls, there would be liveliness. But today, the ship was extremely quiet. The beautiful girls were sitting obediently in their chairs. They seemed to be looking down, but in fact, they could not suppress the curiosity in their hearts. They kept glancing at the two girls who were talking with the corner of their eyes. Xiao Chao held Sung Song's hand and pouted. She looked like a duckling looking for fish in the reeds. She said pitifully, "This is the first time I left Chang'an, and you did not accompany me. Do you still treat me as a friend?" Sang Sang only had 3 friends in Chang'an. They were Li Yu, the princess of the Tang Empire, Tang Xiaotang, a girl from the Devil's Doctrine, and Xiao Chao. These 3 friends were very different in status, but she had never considered these things and treated each of them sincerely. She felt sorry for being complained by Xiao Chao and explained helplessly, "Young master likes peace and quiet. I can't do anything about it. You are already engaged. How can there be a young master?" Xiao Chao looked at her and said angrily, "You have to understand your current status. If you keep calling him young master, that guy will really order you around like a handmaiden." Sang Sang thought to herself that although they were engaged, there was no difference between life and the past. She was used to calling him young master over the past few years. She was not used to calling him by his name. The girls in the cabin finally confirmed their guesses and confirmed Sung Song's identity. They also guessed who the guy Xiao Chao was talking about was. They were shocked and could not suppress their excitement. As the saying goes, there are always beauties in every generation. The girls in the House of Red Sleeves had a good income and it was easy for them to get out of the registry. Hence, they changed quickly. Lu Shui's group had already married or entered into business. The girls who went to the Lank Temple this time were all very young. They had heard of the legendary stories of the House of Red Sleeves, but they had never seen it with their own eyes. It was not until they saw how intimate Xiao Chao was with the dark-skinned girl that they were shocked to confirm that the rumors were true. Sang Sang was no longer the inconspicuous handmaiden in the old brush pen shop. Even if the people in Chang'an did not know that she was the successor of the divine priest of light, they knew that she was the closest to the princess. They also knew that she was the missing daughter of Xingjing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library. Of course, the most famous identity for Sang Sang was her relationship with Ning Quebec. The engagement between Ning Ke and Sang Sang was undoubtedly the most sensational event in Chang'an in the past 6 months. One was a student of the 2nd floor of the academy, the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, and also a great calligrapher who was favored by His Majesty. The other was the daughter of Xingjing, the Grand Secretary of the princess, and also the successor of the divine priest. Although it was a simple engagement, it still caused a stir. His Majesty gave them countless gold, silver, and jewelry, and countless ministers came in person. For some people who did not know the inside story, the most shocking scene of the day happened when the Westhill Divine Palace specially sent a senior divine priest to congratulate them and presented them with countless makeup boxes. The senior brothers and sisters in the back of the mountain of the academy naturally had gifts, but in Ning Ke's eyes, those extremely poor things were not worth mentioning. However, he did not expect that the headmaster of the academy would be the poorest one. He did not even bother to write any words like "beautiful girl" and only gave a box of sweet pastries. That guy? Which guy? Ning Ke walked into the cabin and looked at Xiao Chao. He said, "Aunt Jian treats you well and even let you be the foreman. But don't think that you can climb over my head just because you have her support." Xiao Chao snorted and did not want to talk to him. She just held Sung Song's hand tightly. The girls in the cabin guessed his identity and hurriedly stood up and bowed to him. For a moment, the flowers were slightly fluttering, and the fragrance was floating. Thinking of the identity and status of this young man, especially the reputation of the great calligrapher, the beautiful girls' eyes gradually became misty and passionate, and they were quite eager to give it a try. Xiao Chao looked at the somewhat chaotic scene and slightly frowned. She said, "Don't think too much. Go back and ask the sisters in the brothel who can really get close to Ning Quebec. All the girls in Chang'an are not allowed to receive him. This is the iron rule set by Mistress Jian. This iron rule had long become a joke in the House of Red Sleeves and even in the brothel industry in Chang'an. How could the girls not know this reason? But thinking that they were already out of Chang'an and would spend many days in the same boat with Ning Ke on the Great Lake, how could they bear to miss such an opportunity? So their eyes were still blazing. Xiao Chao looked at Ning Ke and said helplessly, "You are a man with a wife. Can't you be more low-key? So please don't always hold my wife's hand." Ning Ke walked forward with a smile, grabbed Sang Sang's hand, and took her out of the cabin. The sound of the lake waves gradually stopped, the oil lamp in the cabin dimmed, and the ink on the table swayed gently. The warship left the dock and slowly sailed to the vast Great Lake. Ning Ke looked at the thin letter on the table, and no one knew what he was thinking. Sang Sang looked at the letter in his hand and said seriously, "This is ours." That letter was left by Cui Shi in the inn in Yangguan City before he left a few days ago. The letter was very thin, and there were only 2 pieces of paper in it. A few simple words were written on one piece of paper, and a banknote of 500,000 taels of silver on the other piece of paper. "I know there will be a double payment tomorrow, starting from the early morning. Please vote for me, just like you voted for Sang Sang. However, there will be no outbreak tomorrow, and there will be no outbreak during the double payment period, and there may even be a break in chapters. I have been sitting from morning to night to write a chapter, and it is really uncomfortable. I will try my best to write. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 5:15. I recommend a new book, titled, Fairy Mountain. The author is an old friend of mine. His writing is skillful and the plot is wonderful. I can guarantee his reputation. You can go and have a look or keep it. You will not lose out. The Cui family was generous enough to give her 500,000 taels of silver on their first meeting. It was hard to imagine. Such a large amount of silver was enough to do many things in the world. Sang Sang did not know why the Cui family had sent so much silver, but she knew that if Ning Ke accepted it, he would be in big trouble. However, she did not even think about it and thought that he should accept it. This was 500,000 taels of silver. She had never seen so much money in her life. Don't accept it. We will be punished by God like Mr. Ku. Ning Ke read the letter and knew the Cui family's intention. He explained, "Your father's first wife is Cui Shi's cousin. She is now in Qinghe Prefecture. That year, it was this woman who sent you out of the Zeng mansion with the intention of killing you. The Cui family gave you this silver to ask you to forgive that woman, or at least not implicate the Cui family. Therefore, this silver is not ours, but yours." Sang Sang was slightly stunned and said, "This is worth 500,000 taels of silver?" Ning Ke said, "If you were the daughter of the Grand Secretary Zeng Jing, 500,000 taels of silver would be a bit expensive. But now you are the successor of the Divine Priest of Light. In the future, if you remember these things, even the aristocratic families in Qinghe Prefecture will not want to face the anger of the great Divine Priest of West Hill." After understanding the origin of this thin note, Sang Sang became a little hesitant. She looked at Ning Ke and asked seriously, "Then do you think I should accept it?" Ning Ke said, "It depends on whether you want to forgive them." Sang Sang said, "Of course I won't forgive them. But I don't want to find that woman for revenge." Ning Ke was slightly surprised and asked, "Why?" Sang Sang said, "Because without that woman, would not have been found by you." Ning Ke laughed and said, "If that is the case, then keep the note and let the Cui family feel at ease." Sang Sang said worriedly, "Will it cause any trouble?" Ning Ke said, "What trouble can there be?" Sang Sang said, "Isn't it said that if you accept money from others, your hands will be short?" Ning Ke raised his right hand and said, "My hand won't become shorter. This silver is just to buy you to calm your anger. If the aristocratic families in Qinghe County really want to use this money to buy me to do something, do you think I'll just do it obediently? Sang Sang said worriedly, it's not good to take the money and do nothing, right? Ning Ke looked at her and asked, is money more important or credibility? Sang Sang thought for a moment and said, it depends on how much money it is. Ning Ke gently waved the thin silver note in his hand. Sang Sang looked at the notes between his fingers and said without hesitation, this is more important. Then, she came to her senses and said awkwardly, is it a disease to love money so much? Ning Ke said, loving money is not a disease, because not having money is fatal. In fact, there was no need for any reason at all. Whether it was him or Sang Sang, it was impossible for them to return the 500,000 taels of silver notes that they had received, even if it involved something more troublesome than Qinghe County, even if they had to pay the price of credibility and honor. That was because they had suffered enough from not having money since they were young. Their love or greed for money had long become an inviolable instinct. If this was a disease, then they would definitely not be willing to cure it. Due to the difficult life they had since childhood, Ning Ke and Sang Sang had developed some instinctive living habits. Apart from their love of money, they were also sensitive to danger and would jump away like rabbits if they could foresee trouble in advance. They would never cause any trouble, which were also some of the most distinctive habits. Therefore, in the following days, Ning Ke did not leave the cabin as the battleship slowly moved south on the surface of the Great Swamp. Xian Zhilang's ship invited him several times, but he gently but firmly refused. Xian Zhilang was not a simple person. That was why he had so simply revealed his camp and thoughts to Ning Ke in the conversation that day. The more complicated he was, the more Ning Ke did not want to communicate with him, because he did not want to participate in the important matter of the succession of the Tang Empire's throne. As a representative of the Academy entering the human realm, he was qualified to express his opinion on the succession of the Tang Empire's throne. However, he did not have any opinion. His only opinion was that the current emperor was so wise that he could choose whoever he wanted to succeed the throne in the future. As for whether the Academy should play a role in it, or whether it needed to gain some kind of benefit from it, the Academy really did not need it. No matter who became the Tang Empire's emperor in the future, he must maintain respect for the Academy. Moreover, Ning Ke really did not care which prince would be able to sit on the dragon throne in the future. The core disciples of the headmaster of Academy, who were on the second floor, naturally stood higher than the people on the ground. They could see further and did not care about the red dust that was gradually blown up by the wind. What Ning Ke cared about now had gradually gone beyond the scope of the human world and entered the realm of the outside world. It had become something that was unknown to the world, but would affect the entire world. For example, the underworld invasion. For example, the rumor that he was the son of Yama. For example, Sang Sang's illness. It was already autumn. The autumn wind, which should have been clear and slightly dry, was steamed by the boundless waters of the great swamp. It was moist and refreshing when it entered the window. Ning Ke looked at the lines that looked like cursive characters on the fu paper slowly forming. With his sharp eyes, he confirmed that the black gold powder mixed in the fu ink was evenly distributed in the lines. He put the brush in his hand on the inkstone and turned to look at the lake outside the window. He was silent and no one knew what he was thinking. The more he thought about the unknown, the more vigilant he became. He always felt that something was happening in the unseen world, and that it seemed to be related to himself and the Academy. Because the words, in the unseen world, were too ecstatic, he once again thought of the legend of the underworld invasion. Even the headmaster of Academy could not find the passage of the light of Buddha to suppress the underworld in the Lank Temple. He thought that it was even more impossible for him to find it. But what if he was really the son of Yama? The rumor about Ning Ke's identity had already spread in the world. He did not know what the Vedantas of the Buddhism sect who had wanted to kill him would do now, nor did he know what was waiting for him in the Lank Temple. As the lake water gently swayed, they got closer to the Lank Temple. He became more and more silent. If he acted according to his instincts, because of the growing vigilance or strange omen in his heart, Ning Ke might not hesitate to take Sang Sang to stop the journey and return to Chang'an as soon as possible. But he did not do so. Instead, he let the fleet speed up. Because Sang Sang's illness suddenly relapsed. When they left Chang'an, Sang Sang's cold illness seemed to have healed. She went all the way south to bask in the sun, and it seemed that even the root of the illness was gone. But after they boarded the ship, Ning Ke was surprised to find that the pair of little feet in his arms every night were getting colder and colder. What made him even more uneasy was that basking in the sun and cultivating divine skills seemed to be unable to effectively suppress the cold qi in Sang Sang's body. Sang Sang did not feel the changes in her body, or she felt it, but she was worried that Ning Ke would be worried, so she did not say anything and continued as usual every day. Ning Ke was worried that she would be worried, so he did not tell her. He began to pay attention to whether his wine bag was full. Every night, he quietly untied his clothes and placed Sang Sang's cold little feet in the warmest place. Then he began to think about what the headmaster had said before he left. Only now did he understand why the headmaster wanted him to take Sang Sang to the Lang temple. It seemed that only the elders of the Buddhism sect who lived in seclusion could cure Sang Sang. Because he understood, he did not understand. He could not understand why even the West Hill Divine Palace and the Academy could not cure Sang Sang. Was it still an illness that the headmaster could not cure? Since he could not understand, Ning Ke stopped thinking about it. Anyway, no matter what the process was, the final result was already determined. He had to cure Sang Sang, and then he had to go to the Lang temple to face the mercy or thunder of the Buddhism sect. He might even have to face the moment when his identity as the son of Yama was confirmed. Walking in the great swamp, facing the lake wind, the surface of the water was dotted with white stars, and seagulls occasionally flew by. Under the double pressure of vigilance against the unknown and worry about Sang Sang's health, Ning Ke cultivated silently. He kept writing talismans, meditating, and cultivating the Great Spirit every day. Amidst the light of the lake, the originally indistinct threshold seemed to have become a little closer, a little clearer. In the world, what people had to do often meant an opportunity for a breakthrough. For Ning Ke, there were only a few things in the world that he had to do, such as Sang Sang's safety. Long Qing threatened him with Sang Sang at the Daming Lake in the wilderness, and he broke into the see-through state. Then he shot Long Qing, who was about to enter the knowing destiny state, into a cripple. Now in the great swamp in autumn, he once again encountered an opportunity to break into the knowing destiny state. But this time, he did not even notice it. As the saying goes, a country in chaos produces a loyal minister, and a poet in grief and indignation. Sang Sang could help Ning Ke break out of the state. In the depths of the West Hill Mountains, far away from the great swamp, Prince Long Qing was also waiting for his own opportunity. He did not know if the opportunity would appear, or when it would appear. But he believed that the Abbey Dean had saved him from the state of the living dead by the South Sea, and sent him to the Jishou Abbey, which was regarded as a holy land by all cultivators in the world, was a great opportunity for him. Coming to the Jishou Abbey allowed him to see the possibility of becoming a powerhouse again. It allowed him to vaguely find a chance for success, and ignited his burning desire. He thought that this was an opportunity, because these were what he thought in his heart, and all the thoughts in his heart were the will of Haotian. However, there was always a distance between reality and ideal. Just like when he was collecting fish at the fishing port in the South Sea, he saw the wooden plank between the fishing boat and the dock. It seemed that he could easily board the fishing boat as long as he walked on it, but in fact, the plank was full of slippery fish scales and internal organs, and it was easy to slip and fall into the sea. Long Qing wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He knew that another of his ribs had been broken. He looked at the horrifying old Taoist priest who had only half of his body left on the snow couch. The old Taoist priest was screaming and seemed like he could beat him to death at any time. Pain and confusion appeared in his eyes. How long would his life as a servant last? Where was the opportunity? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 5:16. Long Qing had been a handyman in the Jishou Abbey for a long time. Every day, he had to climb up the red mountain that was covered in green vines and deliver things to the oddly shaped old Taoist priests in the cave. He was extremely tired every day and had to bear great mental pressure. This was especially so for the old Taoist priest who had been cut in half. The old Taoist priest treated him like a pig and constantly humiliated and tortured him. He was only satisfied when he was injured and vomited blood. Although he was humiliated and tortured, his life was not threatened. After a few days, Long Qing guessed that although the old Taoist priests in the cave were somewhat abnormal, they knew his background and did not dare to kill him. Therefore, he continued to endure and sometimes even took the initiative to talk to the old Taoist priests. From the experience given to him by the stories in the books, these old Taoist priests who were imprisoned in the cave like ghosts must be extremely lonely. Therefore, as long as he talked more, he might really be able to cultivate some kind of relationship with these old Taoist priests. Once that happened, it would naturally be of great benefit to him. This kind of hope seemed a little childish and cute. So far, apart from asking him about the things that happened in the cultivation world in the recent decades, the Taoist priests were still constantly mocking his low cultivation state and angrily roaring about how he could enter the abbey when he was so weak. But at least he had obtained some information through these conversations, such as the surname of the disabled old Taoist priest who had previously made him vomit blood and fly backward with one of his ribs broken. The old Taoist priest surnamed he called himself the Half-Man Taoist, which was obviously not his real name but a painful self-mockery after he had been cut in half. According to seniority, he should be the uncle of the current hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace. No wonder he had such an unfathomable state. The Half-Man Taoist's hands were deep in the fur of the snowfield dire wolf. His old Taoist robe was fluttering even though there was no wind. His expression was as cold as a stone, but his eyes revealed endless violent pain and despair. Looking at Long Qing, who stood up with difficulty while wiping his blood, he said faintly, "On the first day you came, I said that you are a piece of trash. What right do you have to talk to me? Get lost." Long Qing did not leave the cave silently like before, because he heard something different from the words of the predecessor from Haotian Taoism. The man was obviously desperate, and he knew what his despair was. So he walked to the bed covered with wolf skin, knelt down and said, "If I was useless, the Abbey Dean would not have let me come here, nor would he have given me the opportunity to meet you." Hearing the Abbey Dean's name, the Half-Man Taoist gradually calmed down. He looked at Long Qing, who was kneeling in front of him, and smiled nervously. He said, "But you are a piece of trash." "I'm trash now, but that doesn't mean I'll always be trash." Long Qing replied calmly. He lowered his head slightly, and a faint gray luster flashed across his eyes. "Calling you trash is indeed unfair." The Half-Man Taoist looked at him expressionlessly and said, "Being beaten, scolded, and humiliated by me, you still insist on entering the cave every day, which shows that your will is strong enough. Looking at the speed of your injury recovery, it shows that your body has a good foundation. You have been secretly practicing the gray eye, just to find a chance to absorb my power. Whether you want to deceive me or go the way of love, it proves that you are a ruthless person." Hearing these words, Long Qing's body shook. He did not expect that the disabled old Taoist in front of him, who seemed to be crazy, had seen through his thoughts from the beginning. Suddenly, endless fear grew in him, and he wanted to turn around and escape from this magnificent but extremely gloomy cave. However, for some unknown reason, perhaps because he was stiff and unable to move, perhaps because he knew that no matter how fast he escaped, he could not be faster than the old Taoist's eyes, or perhaps he just wanted to take a gamble, he did not move. He was still kneeling in front of the old Taoist, but he lowered his head a little more. The gray eye is indeed an amazing skill. After being modified by the predecessors of Taoism, compared with the original Tao Tai demonic skill, it does not need to devour the flesh and blood of the cultivator, but directly absorbs the opponent's psyche power. It is indeed one of the best choices for sneak attacks and plots. The half-man Taoist looked up at the top of the cave, as if looking at the sky. He remembered many past events and said slowly, but in fact, after such modification, it does not look so bloody, so naturally there will be some loss. Compared with Tao Tai, it is difficult to use the psyche power and even spirits suppressed by the gray eye to integrate with your original world, and it will cause many problems in the future. It is not as powerful as the real Tao Tai. It is a pity that the practice of Tao Tai in the Devil's Doctrine has long been lost. Now that the Devil's Doctrine has withered, presumably no one will know it anymore. This powerful old Taoist, whose cultivation state had almost broken through the 5 states, did not know that Master Lotus had secretly recultivated the practice of Tao Tai. Long Qing's expression was slightly cold. He had already seen the relevant records in the Sha hand scroll of the tomes of arcane, but he did not pay much attention to it. Now that he heard what the half-man Taoist said, he knew that it was a very troublesome problem. But now what puzzled him the most was why the half-man Taoist did not kill him or drive him away after seeing through his intentions, but began to teach him like a teacher. The half-man Taoist withdrew his gaze from the top of the cave and looked down at Long Qing. He said indifferently, "You have a strong will, a good physical body, ambition, ideas, patience, and ruthlessness. It seems that you have all the conditions to be a successful hero. Then do you know why I still say that you are a waste?" "I do not know. A few days ago, I heard about your experience. I know that you used to have a good time, but in the end, you were destroyed by the disciples of the academy. Then let me ask you, what is the most inferior to that disciple of the academy?" Hearing this question, Long Qing was silent for a long time. In fact, he had asked himself this question many times. He could not understand how Ning Ke was better than him. He was once the near-perfect West Hill divine son, while Ning Ke was just a soldier at the border of the city of Wei. But he had been continuously defeated by his opponent, and the more he lost, the more miserable he became. What was the answer to this question? "You are not thick-skinned enough." The half-man Taoist looked at him and said faintly, or in other words, "You are still trying to preserve your last pride. You do not understand that to become the most powerful cultivator, you must know when to abandon your pride and sink yourself into the swamp of filth." Long Qing looked up and frowned in confusion. He asked, "I do not think I have anything to be proud of now." The half-man Taoist raised his hand and pointed at his knees. He said, "Although you kneel in front of me, in your heart, you are still standing." Long Qing said, "Does Ning Ke not have his pride?" The half-man Taoist said, "I have never seen Ning Ke and do not know what he has done. But I believe that if he must achieve something, he will definitely give up all the pride hidden in his heart. If he was in the Jishou Abbey now, he would definitely not be like you, climbing the mountain silently every day and trying to use emotional attacks or insidious means to steal my power." Long Qing was a little confused. He asked, "Then what will he do?" The half-man Taoist laughed hoarsely. The wrinkles on his wrinkled face were like raw noodles that were about to be pulled apart. He said, "On the first day he entered the cave, he would kneel in front of me and beg me to give him half of my power. But, as far as I know, the people in the academy are very proud. That kind of pride is just a facade. It is pride towards heaven, earth, and people. But they will never be proud of themselves. It is just some cheap pride after becoming strong. Those untrustworthy B***cheese can betray Haotian and join the Devil's Doctrine as long as they can make themselves stronger. There is no pride at all." The half-man Taoist roared angrily. His face was red and his trembling right hand danced wildly in the air. It was as if he wanted to grab an untouchable enemy and tear him into countless pieces. Everything in the cave seemed to feel this anger. The snow-white wolf's fur became smoother and smoother. The luminous pearls on the cave walls quietly dimmed. Long Qing knelt in front of the half-man Taoist. He felt as if he was about to be burned by this powerful mental power. He used all the strength in his body to prevent his trembling body from collapsing to the ground. The wind suddenly stopped, and the cave returned to a dead silence. The half-man Taoist looked at Long Qing and asked slowly, "Do you know who cut me in half at the waist?" His voice was very calm and seemed to be emotionless. But it was faintly filled with endless pain. Long Qing's hands were still trembling slightly. His fingertips were slightly bent and almost scratched. He risked the old Taoist's anger and said in a trembling voice, "It was either the headmaster of the academy or Kuharan." The half-man Taoist was slightly startled and asked, "How do you know?" Long Qing said, "Senior, your cultivation should have exceeded the 5 states and had already transcended the mortal realm. In the world, there are only 2 people who can defeat you and injure you so badly." Hearing his answer, the half-man Taoist laughed with endless hatred and said, "You are right. Back then, I was cut in half by Kuharan. And the old guys hiding in this mountain cave were either injured by Kuharan or the headmaster of the academy. Back then, I was seriously injured in the battle with Kuharan. If I didn't have a secret method to save my life, would have suffered endless pain and died on the spot. But even though I survived now, I can't forget the pain back then. I can't forget the feeling of watching my intestines flow out with my own eyes. I can't forget the feeling of watching my lower body leave with my own eyes. I can't forget the pain. Although Kuharan is already dead, I still can't forget the pain. I can't accept it. I want Kuharan to die in pain. So I always want to destroy the academy. However, for the rest of my life, I can only rely on my abnormal upper body to crawl around in this cave like a worm. I'm just a useless person without a butt. How can I destroy the academy?" The half-man Taoist looked at Long Qing, who was kneeling in front of him, and laughed like a madman. He said hopelessly, "The Abbey Dean sent you to me. I thought you had a chance, but I didn't expect you to still be a useless person. Although you have a butt, you are not as good as me without a butt." Long Qing suddenly raised his head and asked, "How can I not become a useless person?" The old Taoist stopped laughing and stared at his eyes. He said faintly, "The so-called strong are those who can pursue power at all costs." Long Qing knelt on the ground and said with a slightly trembling voice, "I chose to cultivate the gray eyes because I wanted to plot against you, or any predecessor of Haotian Taoism in this mountain cave. I thought it was already at all costs. I don't know how to go further." The old Taoist said with a strange smile, "Since you want to do it at all costs, then you should not have any other emotions or positions except for power. Be it pride or belief, you should throw them all away. If one's butt determines one's position, you should be like me now, without a butt at all." Long Qing asked in a low voice, "What about Haotian?" The old Taoist said sternly, "The reason why those B*****s in the academy are so powerful is that they have no belief and no rules. In their eyes, Haotian is not a butt, but a fart. So if you want to defeat the academy, you have to have no belief and no rules. You have to learn to treat Haotian as a fart. Let it go." I laughed wildly for 3 times. I finally wrote it. "Thank you for your photos, thank you for the encouragement from the big girl, thank you for my father's eyes, thank you for your monthly votes. If you still have votes, please continue. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 5:17. In the wilderness, Long Qing's cultivation had been destroyed by Ning Kei's arrow. He had lost all hope and even tried to give up his faith and walk into the deep night. However, he did not die in the end and did not truly throw himself into the arms of Yama. It was also that desperate experience that made him understand that simple words or actions were not true betrayals. As a firm believer of Haotian, it could be said that it was the most difficult thing in the world to erase his fear and faith towards Haotian from the bottom of his heart. It was like trying to disperse the light from the sky. Long Qing knelt in front of the half-man Taoist and said, the will of Haotian is too strong. It has long surpassed my will. I have no idea how to erase it. The half-man Taoist asked, what is the will of Haotian? Long Qing thought of the conversation between him and the Abbé Dean on the boat in the South Sea and said, Haotian is omnipresent and omniscient. Everything in the world is under the control of Haotian. Therefore, our thoughts are the will of Haotian. The half-man Taoist did not expect him to have such a deep understanding of the will of Haotian. He nodded with slight admiration and said, the thoughts are the subjective manifestation of the will of Haotian. However, there must be two sides to everything. The will of Haotian also has its objective side. Have you ever felt it? Long Qing was slightly confused. He thought that the will of Haotian in the objective category was the body of the divine law of Haotian. How could a mortal in the world perceive it? Haotian has no size, but it has infinite size. When it is big, it is like countless oceans. When it is small, it is like thousands of pieces of gravel. Haotian has no shape, but it has countless shapes. Sometimes it is a beast, sometimes it is a human, sometimes it is a tree, sometimes it is a mountain, sometimes it is the sea, sometimes it is the sun, and sometimes it is the world. The half-man Taoist's eyes were slightly drooping. His face, which was like a dead tree, seemed to be plated with a layer of holy light. His voice was emotionless, as if these descriptions of Haotian did not come from his mouth, but originally existed in this world and appeared in the cave through his voice. There was no description of Haotian in the West Hill scriptures, because in the teachings, any attempt to describe Haotian's behavior was extremely disrespectful and blasphemous. This was the first time Long Qing had heard someone describe Haotian. Although the description seemed simple, it made his Taoist heart tremble violently. What made his Taoist heart tremble was not only because he had heard the image of Haotian's divine law, but also because he had finally confirmed a fact: the crippled old Taoist on the bed, who only had half of his body left, had indeed broken through the 5 states. This was because only cultivators who had broken through the 5 states and entered the Tianqi state could be lucky enough to see Haotian's divine law with their own eyes. Only these people were allowed to describe Haotian's appearance. However, a Haotian Taoism predecessor in the Tianqi state was cut in half by a sword. Long Qing could not help but feel that the headmaster of the academy and Kuharan were extremely terrifying. The half-man Taoist seemed to know what Long Qing was thinking at this time. He slowly opened his eyes and said, no matter what form Haotian appears in the world, it must be grand, solemn, and self-evidently great. We cannot be great, we can only be strong. The reason why the powerful and lowly non-believers in the academy could completely erase the will of Haotian was because they had never truly believed in Haotian from the beginning. It is difficult for Haotian Taoism disciples to do this, so I will tell you the true description of Haotian now. Long Qing's voice trembled slightly as he asked, why are you telling me this? Because since you cannot erase the will of Haotian, you can only try to forget. You did not even know what Haotian was before, so how could you forget? The half-man Taoist looked at him and said, only by knowing can you forget. Long Qing was deep in thought. He lowered his head and fell into a long silence. After a long time, the luminous pearls on the stone walls of the cave lit up again. The white wolf fur on the soft bed swayed in the wind. He finally raised his head, his expression calm. The half-man Taoist asked with a hint of anxiety, have you ever forgotten? Long Qing asked, what have I forgotten? Ha 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 ha. The half-man Taoist laughed. He excitedly stretched out his hand and wanted to pat his thigh to vent the pain, despair, and suffering of waiting for so many years. The old Taoist only remembered the fact that he had not forgotten for many years after he slapped his palm heavily into the wolf fur. He had long lost his legs, and he also had no buttocks. He was now just a poor deformed old Taoist with only half a body left. So he cried out in pain. The ghost-like mournful cries kept ringing in the quiet cave. Long Qing calmly looked at the old Taoist beating his chest and wrists like a madman, and even occasionally strangling his own throat until his face turned red. It was not until the unpleasant sounds of crying and laughing gradually stopped that he said, my natal item is a peach blossom. There was a peach blossom on the chest of his Taoist robe, a black peach blossom. The old Taoist narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at him, asking hoarsely, "Why is it a peach blossom?" Long Qing calmly said, "After I entered the no-doubt state, I had never decided on a natal item. Later, when I was studying in the Revelation Institute, I heard the story of the headmaster of the academy going to West Hill to cut down peach blossoms. From then on, I vowed to let peach blossoms bloom all over the world, so peach blossoms became my natal item." Listening to these words, the old Taoist looked at him more and more strangely. Long Qing's expression became calmer and calmer. He smiled and said, "At the beginning of cultivation, my dream was to lead Haotian Taoism to defeat the academy. These years, with so many things happening, especially the appearance of Ning Ke, my idea became more direct and firm. I will devote all my life to the great cause of destroying the academy and the Tang Empire." The old Taoist looked into his eyes and saw many things. He said, "Very good." As soon as he finished speaking, the old Taoist heavily hit Long Qing's left chest with his palm. A powerful force gushed out from the palm and instantly penetrated his muscles and ribs, stabbing straight into his heart. Long Qing's face suddenly turned pale, and his eyebrows were raised like swords. He seemed to be in extreme pain, but he did not think of avoiding from the beginning. At this time, he did not try to escape from this skinny and horrifying palm. Because he knew that the state difference between him and the old Taoist was like heaven and earth. No matter how he tried to escape, it would be futile. And he firmly believed that the old Taoist had previously described Haotian to make him forget Haotian, not to kill him with one palm. The half-man Taoist's skinny palm was like a vertical blue lake that had shrunk many times. There was a very quiet aura condensed on the palm. It was as viscous as the lake water, but it gave people a sense of cleanliness. It was impossible to tear it apart, and one did not want to tear it apart. "Your eyes are too black and white." The half-man Taoist stared into Long Qing's eyes and said. The expression on his skinny face did not show whether he was crying or laughing. Long Qing's body trembled slightly. From the old Taoist's words, he confirmed that he had made the right bet. His expectations were about to become reality. He looked into the old Taoist's eyes, filled with gratitude and shock. In the blink of an eye, his black and white pupils began to undergo an extremely strange change. The boundary between his black pupils and white pupils began to blur. His black pupils grew fainter and fainter, while his white pupils grew darker and darker. They grew closer and closer to each other until they became a completely uniform gray. As Long Qing's eyes turned gray, a strong attraction penetrated his ocean of qi and tightly sucked the half-man Taoist's skinny palm to his left chest. The half-man Taoist had expected this, and there was no change in his expression. In a moment, the lake in the skinny palm became a vast ocean and ferociously poured into Long Qing's body. Long Qing trembled violently, and blood began to ooze from the corner of his mouth. Invisible wounds appeared in his internal organs, and his eyes were also bloodshot. However, in the mix of black and white, they were gradually washed into a monotonous and palpitating gray. He slowly closed his eyes. A Tianqi strongman who had surpassed the 5 states, even if he was seriously injured, and even if he only had half of his psyche power, was still not a gift that Long Qing could easily accept. At this moment, Long Qing felt that his body was like a leather bag filled with alcohol, about to explode in the next moment. He felt that his chest was already bulging like a mountain, about to burst in the next moment. He felt that his internal organs had long been destroyed into minced meat by the powerful aura. Fortunately, he forcibly maintained a trace of clarity in his Taoist heart. He woke up at the moment before the disillusionment came. He remembered that the perception, consciousness, experience, knowledge, and psyche power that he had endured at this moment were all intangible and intangible. All of this was an illusion, and there was no change in his body. He knew that he had to endure this pain in order to obtain a new life. A stronger new life. The wrinkles on the old Taoist's face seemed to have deepened, but also seemed to have lightened. Only half of his body was left. He leaned forward slightly on the edge of the bed, and his face was very close to Long Qing's. Looking at Long Qing's closed eyes and struggling to support himself, he smiled and said in a trembling voice, "Absorb more, absorb more." His laughter was very unpleasant, and his smile was very strange. It was full of love and greed, and it felt extremely abnormal. It was like an old demon in a mountain village at night, feeding its big-headed son. At this moment, dozens of extremely powerful auras penetrated the hard stone walls and quietly came to this cave. Each powerful aura represented a strongman of Haotian Taoism in a cave on this mountain peak. These strongmen of Haotian Taoism did not interfere with this strange transfer of power. Instead, they quietly watched. It could be sensed that these auras were very calm, but there were extremely complicated emotions hidden in them. Long Qing was unaware of this. His pale face appeared very strange and excited scarlet, and his throat kept moving up and down, and there came the sound of da-da. He was like a newborn cub, closing his eyes and frowning, desperately sucking all the milk that he could suck, extremely satisfied and intoxicated. The old Taoist looked at Long Qing, and there was also a satisfied and intoxicated smile on his face. Perhaps he was too excited or for some other reason. The waist cavity that was cut by the sword years ago began to ooze out, wetting the snow white for a mattress. Absorb more. Don't worry. Suddenly, the smile on the old Taoist's face disappeared instantly. He stared at Long Qing, and said with a voice as cold as steel, "You can only take what I give you. If I don't give it to you, you can't take it." Long Qing still closed his eyes, as if he could not hear what he said. He really looked like a starving cub. I wish everyone a happy Mid-Autumn Festival. I wish everyone's health and happiness. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 518. Receiving no response, the half-man Taoist's eyes were filled with endless shock and incredulity. He scolded sternly, "How dare you?" Long Qing still did not respond. A newborn beast's individual strength was naturally extremely weak. However, its desire for lust and the vitality it released was precisely at its most powerful and boundless moment. Long Qing was the cub. He closed his eyes and sucked in everything he could, calmly, greedily, hungrily, and innocently. The black peach blossom in his lapel became darker and darker. His chest seemed to become a bottomless abyss, sucking air from the old Taoist's palm. The old Taoist's face suddenly became even more haggard, and his body became thinner and smaller, even faintly looking like a hunchback. He had placed all his hopes on Long Qing, who was kneeling in front of him, and was even willing to pour half of his cultivation into Long Qing's body. However, at this moment, he found that something was wrong, and he even faintly felt great fear. He was the half-man Taoist. Even if he lost half of his cultivation, he could still survive. However, with Long Qing's greedy and terrifying appearance, how could he give up? If this situation continued, even if he was a powerhouse in the Tianxi state who had surpassed the 5 states, he would not be able to hold on for long. He would die. Living like a rat in a dark cave after being cut in half at the waist was a terrible mental torture. But it was still living. In the shadow of death, no one would really believe that it was better to be dead than alive. It was the same for the half-man Taoist. After being cut in half by Kuharan's sword, he had survived with great difficulty. Decades later, he naturally would not be willing to die like this. "You're too greedy." The half-man Taoist felt the psyche power surging out of his body like a tide. His eyes were filled with uncontrollable anger. A strong aura was released from his body. The scrawny palm that had fallen on Long Qing's left chest like a blue lake suddenly became a mountain, pressing forward. There were several crisp cracking sounds. 5 ribs on Long Qing's left chest broke. He spat out a mouthful of blood, wetting the black peach blossom on his chest. Then, he woke up. Long Qing slowly raised his head and looked at the old Taoist who was close at hand. He said indifferently, "Since it has already begun, why should it end like this? Since you have already absorbed so much, why don't you absorb more?" The half-man Taoist knew that he had already awoken from his almost instinctive state of madness. He did not expect him to speak in such a manner, and could not help but become angrier. However, before his anger could turn into violent flames, it was already replaced by fear and confusion. Earlier, his palm had fallen like a mountain and broken several of Long Qing's ribs, but it did not leave Long Qing's chest. Instead, it was stained with blood and sank deep into Long Qing's chest. There was a hole in Long Qing's chest. The half-man Daoist's palm reached into the hole through the Daoist robe and sank halfway into his forearm. There was a black peach blossom stained with blood. The half-man Taoist wanted to pull his hand out, but he could not. He could clearly feel that his palm and half of his forearm had come into contact with the slippery and sticky internal organs. The faintly wriggling flesh and blood seemed to be coming to life, making him feel extremely disgusted and cold. The hole in Long Qing's body was like a quagmire. The quagmire was filled with mud that was countless feet deep. The mud was extremely sticky, and at the bottom of the quagmire was a dark and endless abyss. The half-man Taoist felt that he was struggling in this quagmire. Countless poisonous miasma continuously seeped into his pores, and the cold and filthy black mud was gradually covering his facial features. After a moment, his body was about to be swallowed by this black quagmire. Although his light and intangible soul could pass through the mud, it would eventually enter the endless abyss and endure hundreds of millions of years of loneliness. That was death. The half-man Taoist became more and more stooped. It was obvious to the naked eye that his body had shrunk. He could not help but tremble violently. He looked at Long Qing, his eyes filled with fear, anger, and confusion. He did not know what had happened and why he could not stop this trash in front of him from taking everything from him. Then he saw Long Qing's eyes. It was a very calm pair of eyes. There was no greed or thirst, not even any emotion. It was like the branches of trees swaying gently in the wind, or the lake water rippling gently in the wind. Because it was natural, it was calm, and it was this calmness that made people easily feel fear. This pair of eyes was no longer black and white, but it was also not as perfectly balanced and perfect gray as before. The black pupils were still darker in color, becoming darker and smaller. Mixed with calm emotions, it looked like a demon from the underworld peeking out from the abyss, quietly watching the world. At this moment, the half-man Taoist suddenly thought of what he had previously described to Long Qing about the true face of Haotian he had seen during the Tianqi. He vaguely understood something, and suddenly felt infinite fear. After Long Qing had used the gray eye to absorb too much of his aura, the old Taoist's body had shrunk. His face was the same, but the distance between his eyes was much wider. He looked like a mentally disabled person who was in a daze under a tree. He looked at Long Qing's emotionless, calm, and terrifying eyes, and murmured with a trembling voice, "Why is this happening? How could Haotian allow you to go beyond the limit?" Long Qing looked at him calmly and said, "You said that to erase Haotian's will, one needs no faith, no rules, so how can there be a limit? But in fact, you are still wrong. No one in this world can really ignore the rules because the rules belong to Haotian's divine realm. That was why Kuharan was killed by the heavens. So to really ignore the rules, one should not erase Haotian's will, but use one's own mind to understand Haotian's will, or even completely transform into Haotian's will." The half-man Taoist's body kept trembling, and blood kept gushing out from his waist. His voice was shrill and terrified as he roared, "Even so, how could Haotian choose a useless person like you? How can mortals like us guess Haotian's will?" Long Qing looked at him and said emotionlessly, "We only need to accept and praise it. Just a moment ago, I wanted more of you, even all of you. And Haotian felt my wish, so you must give all of yourself to me. The half-moon Taoist said mournfully, I don't want to. Long Qing said, you can't stop me, because I have received Haotian's decree. But I will die. The half-moon Taoist roared, cried, and begged. Long Qing said, for decades, your life has been worse than death. Today, you can die in my hands, and you can be free. Give yourself to me before you die, and you will die a worthy death. The half-moon Taoist's body had shrunk a lot, and he looked like a child of a few years old. But this was not rejuvenation, and the wrinkles on his face were deeper than before. He knew that he was going to die soon. He knew that he could not escape from this swamp. He even vaguely guessed that this was really Haotian's decree. But he was still unwilling to die. He screamed in pain and stretched out his moving hand, wanting to tear Long Qing's mouth and dig out his eyes. But strangely, his hand on Long Qing's chest was still the same, and his moving hand had shrunk a lot. It could not reach Long Qing at all, and could only tremble and wave in the air in vain. He looked like a child whose candy had been taken away, extremely miserable and desperate. This is really Haotian's decree. Long Qing looked at him and comforted him. Otherwise, why would you be so stupid to be willing to pass half of your power to me, knowing that I am a cruel and cold person, knowing that I want to plot against you and take all your power? So you can die in peace. The half-moon Taoist's arm, which was waving in the air, became stiff. After a moment, he retracted his hand tiredly. He lowered his head in pain and panted heavily. He said, yes. I know, you are a bad fellow. Why did I give you a chance to plot against me? Perhaps. I really don't want to live anymore. I just want to find an heir to help me fulfill my wish. He raised his head. His head had shrunk a lot, and his eyes were much bigger, and they were about to move to the cheeks on both sides of his face. He looked particularly strange and terrifying. But at this time, the expression in his eyes was no longer resentful, angry, or fearful. There was only a bright light left, which was the relief after understanding. He looked at Long Qing and panted excitedly. He said, kill everyone in the academy for me, and then let the billions of Haotian believers in the world remember my name. My surname is He, and my name is, I will kill everyone in the academy, and I will destroy the Tang Empire. Without waiting for him to finish, Long Qing said calmly, but who you are has little to do with me. You have given me too much humiliation and pain these days, so this is your punishment. The half-moon Taoist was slightly startled, and then he laughed out loud. However, his cultivation base was about to dissipate, and his laughter sounded particularly hoarse and powerless. You are indeed a ruthless and heartless fellow. Forget it, no matter where you go in the future, it is still my cultivation base that will allow you to be reborn. Whether my name is left behind or not, when you roam the world, you will spread my glory. Long Qing smiled and said, exactly. The half-moon Taoist did not speak anymore, and calmly waited for death. But the next moment, he suddenly narrowed his horrifying, deformed eyes and looked at Long Qing. He said, death is coming soon. I don't know if I will fall into the underworld or return to the divine light of Haotian. But I want to tell you that I am still afraid of death, because the end is every life's irrepressible sorrow. Long Qing listened quietly, knowing that the old Taoist's last words must have a deep meaning. I will be afraid of death. They are the same as me. The half-moon Taoist said. Long Qing knew that he was referring to the other old Taoist priests in the mountain cave. The half-moon Taoist raised his head with difficulty and looked at everything in the deep cave. He looked at the dozens of strong breaths and said mockingly, they are watching you suck me dry, and they are feeling my fear of death. So they will definitely not be like me and pass on all their cultivation to you. But just as I cannot resist the temptation of you, they cannot resist the temptation of you. So if they want to live, they cannot allow you to continue living. Unless you leave, they will definitely kill you. Long Qing said after a moment of silence, although it is a little regretful, I understand. The half-moon Taoist looked at him quietly and said lovingly, then run. After saying this, he closed his eyes and fell on the snow-white bed. He died. The dozens of strong breaths in the cave suddenly surged and seemed extremely terrifying. In an instant, they crushed all the luminous pearls on the stone wall and attacked Long Qing's body. Long Qing screamed and his face became snow-white. His knees bounced off the ground and his body was like a leaf. He passed through the only passage among the dozens of breaths and floated out of the cave. He escaped the cave. Without thinking, he directly jumped off the cliff and ran towards the Jishou Abbey in the distance. The dozens of strong breaths, with fear of the unknown, with violent breaths, with angry flames, and with unimaginably powerful states, spewed out from the countless holes in the cliff. The green vines covering the surface of the mountains suddenly shattered and shot towards the sky and the earth like sharp arrows. The earth trembled uneasily, and the whole world seemed to be destroyed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.